My name is Ashley, and at 27, I found myself navigating the dynamics of a family business intertwined with marriage. Growing up, I was the sole focus of my calm, skeptical father and my vivacious, spirited mother. Their union was a harmonious blend of energies, though mom's exuberance could sometimes be overwhelming. When I married son, whom I met through a friend, I hoped for a marriage akin to the vibrant one my parents shared. Son's family owned a renowned French restaurant chain in New York City, contrasting with my family's more modest ventures in the food industry. While dating, son's tales of restaurant life and ambitions were captivating. However, after marriage, I grew weary of the constant comparisons between our family businesses. The discrepancy in our family's businesses became a sore point. Son's family's restaurant empire seemed to overshadow our modest endeavors. Arguments ensued, with son and his family viewing their success as solely their own achievement, ignoring the significant contributions of Todd, son's cousin, who had been taken in by their family after being orphaned. Todd, often referred to as a brother by son but treated more like a servant, played a crucial role in the success of the family business. Yet he was overlooked and underappreciated. My mother-in-law, burdened by the knowledge of Todd's situation, expressed her concerns to me, unable to openly confront her husband and son. Despite their essential roles in the business, Todd and my mother-in-law remained humble and kind. Todd's competence and my mother-in-law's wisdom were evident, yet they were forced to operate under the shadow of son's incompetence and his father's arrogance. Son's ineptitude in managing the business contrasted sharply with Todd's skillful handling of day-to-day operations. Employees respected Todd, often resisting son's unreasonable demands. Behind the scenes, Todd and my mother-in-law worked tirelessly to salvage the business while, during a visit to my hometown, I found myself sharing my marital woes with my parents over a comforting bowl of potato soup. My mother, sipping her soup with gusto, didn't mince words. "Ashley, just get a divorce and come home." My father, though wearing a bitter smile at her bluntness, remained silent. It was too soon to entertain the idea of divorce. After all, we hadn't even been married for 6 months. Disappointed in both Judson, my husband, and my father-in-law, I found solace in the kindness of my mother-in-law and Todd. "I can't just easily get a divorce," I replied with a wry smile, knowing the complexities of my situation. But my mother, undeterred, suggested I leave Judson and join them at their pizza shop. I protested vehemently, while my father, ever the gentle soul, inquired about my troubles. As I poured out my frustrations about Judson's dismissive attitude towards me and his unwarranted suspicions of my relationship with Todd, my mother-in-law shared some revealing insights. She recounted a past incident where Judson, driven by his insecurity and rivalry with Todd, unjustly fired a female employee who had garnered Todd's admiration. My mother's animated nature, a trait she had carried since childhood, provided a welcome distraction from my troubles. I reminisced about how her vivacious personality had initially intimidated potential suitors until my father, drawn to her energy, had become her steadfast partner. Their love story, peppered with anecdotes of youthful charm, lifted my spirits. As we sat together, conversing warmly, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos of my marriage. My parents' unwavering support and my mother's infectious spirit reminded me that, despite the challenges, there was still light to be found in the darkness. I recalled an important matter and asked if I could bring Judson, my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, and Todd to my parents' home. It would be their first visit to my childhood home, and my mother-in-law eagerly expressed her desire to reconnect with my parents. Judson reluctantly agreed, and to my surprise, Todd, showing interest in making pizza, volunteered to join us. I suspected he wanted to ensure Judson behaved himself. My parents gladly agreed, excited to showcase the deliciousness of our pizzas. Mom, perhaps a bit too enthusiastic, exclaimed, "Of course. We'll make them realize how delicious our pizza is." I chuckled, knowing her excitement could sometimes be overwhelming. So we found ourselves at my parents' pizza shop, unaware of the brewing tension ahead. Todd, usually the peacemaker, was ready for any storm that Judson might brew. The moment Judson laid eyes on the quaint pizza shop, he couldn't help but sneer. "Still as old-fashioned as ever," he remarked, fortunate that my mother wasn't there to hear his comment. Knowing her fiery spirit, she might have banned him from the shop on the spot. Ignoring his snide remark, I led everyone inside. Mom greeted them cheerfully, welcoming them warmly. "Long time no see, Judson. Ashley has told me a lot about you, she said, her words laced with sarcasm that Judson seemed to miss entirely, much to Todd's subtle amusement. As Mom continued with her warm greetings, she turned to Todd, remarking on his appearance. "You're Todd, right? So tall and handsome. You look like a model," she exclaimed, overwhelming Todd, who offered a puzzled smile in response. Politely, he thanked her and joined the rest of the group. Meanwhile, Dad was busy preparing pizzas while Mom attempted to serve some drinks and popular side dishes. Judson, however, couldn't resist making a disparaging remark, commenting on the shop's appearance. "Build the store on your mother's old and dirty," he scoffed, displaying his usual lack of tact. My emotions churned with a mix of anger and apprehension as I watched my mother prepare drinks right in front of me. I couldn't bring myself to meet her gaze, so consumed was I by fear. Then, amidst the tension, a menacing voice sliced through the air, demanding a repetition of an earlier remark. My usually cheerful mother's tone dripped with quiet fury, sending shivers down my spine. Despite attempts from my mother-in-law and Todd to intervene, my father-in-law brazenly echoed his disrespectful sentiment, deeming both the shop and its proprietor unfit, even suggesting the risk of food poisoning. My mother, seething with rage, abandoned the drinks and retrieved a 1-liter bottle of wine, her demeanor sharp as she confronted my father-in-law, warning him of dire consequences if he continued his insults. Startled by her forcefulness, he attempted one last jab at her appearance before my mother, fueled by indignation, made a move to retaliate. With a swift intervention from my father, disaster was narrowly averted, but the damage had been done. My father-in-law and Judson, sneering in disdain, exited the shop, leaving the cloud of tension in their wake. Despite my mother's impulse to pursue them, my father and I held her back, struggling to contain her fury. Amidst the chaos, my mother-in-law and Todd offered profuse apologies, though I knew the fault lay not with them but with the condescending attitudes of my father-in-law and Judson. Their callous remarks had ignited the conflict, leaving me seething with anger and hurt. Recognizing my turmoil, my mother-in-law addressed me, expressing regret and suggesting divorce as a viable option for my well-being. Todd, in his quiet manner, echoed her sentiment, recognizing the pattern of such incidents. As I wrestled with conflicting emotions, torn between loyalty to my family and the turmoil within my marriage, the regretful expressions on my mother-in-law and Todd's faces mirrored my own internal struggle. Contemplating divorce, I couldn't shake the guilt I felt for my mother-in-law and Todd. As my father and I struggled with what to do next, my mother cut through the tension with her blunt observation, "You two don't seem happy, especially Todd. You can leave whenever you want, right?" Her direct question caught Todd off guard. He confessed his concern for his aunt, unable to abandon her despite his disdain for my father-in-law and Judson. It was his loyalty to my mother-in-law and his sense of duty toward the other employees that held him back. My mother-in-law, overwhelmed by Todd's true feelings, broke down in tears, burdened by guilt for holding him back. Feeling lost, my father and I exchanged confused glances, unsure of how to proceed. But then, my mother's cheerful laughter cut through the tension. "Ha, that's easy. Leave it to me," she declared, surprising us all. With newfound determination, I made up my mind. After discussing our plans for the future, I returned home to face Judson. Straightforwardly, I announced my decision to sever ties with his family, unable to forgive my father-in-law's hurtful words. Judson's scornful laughter in response only fueled my resolve. I handed him the divorce papers I had prepared, issuing a final warning. "Don't come crying to me after our divorce," I cautioned, but Judson, unable to comprehend the gravity of the situation, remained indifferent. As our marriage dissolved, my mother-in-law and Todd were spared from the ordeal. Though my life was fraught with stress, exacerbated by my father-in-law's insensitivity, I found solace in the freedom of my newfound independence after the divorce. Upon returning to my parents' home about a month later, my ex-father-in-law and ex-husband Judson appeared, their faces drained of color. They delivered divorce papers and a curt message, claiming they were cutting ties with us. Maintaining composure, I faced my ex-father-in-law and remarked on the unfortunate timing of our late-life divorce. My laughter seemed to unnerve Judson further, who muttered about employees quitting and feeling betrayed by Todd, his supposed brother. But Todd's voice, cutting and cold, interrupted Judson's self-pity. He rejected the brotherly title Judson had bestowed upon him. revealing he had never considered Judson as such. Suddenly, Todd emerged, stunning my ex-father-in-law and Judson. Then my former mother-in-law appeared quietly from the shadows. As my ex-in-laws stood dumbfounded, my mother made a bold entrance, revealing that they had been scouted by her company and that they now owned the French restaurant. My ex-father-in-law broke into a cold sweat at this declaration, while my father, observing the scene, smiled modestly. He revealed that running the pizza shop had merely been a hobby. My wife's family owned a group of restaurants, and they had graciously accepted him as their son-in-law. At the mention of the company's name, my ex-father-in-law and Judson stumbled. Realizing the vast difference in scale between their restaurants and our company, it became clear why they had been relegated to running a pizza shop instead of being involved in the family business. Years ago, my father had suffered a collapse from overworking, prompting doctors to suggest he pursue something he enjoyed for his recovery. So my mother and I had reopened this pizza shop, which had been my late grandfather's hobby. In truth, it was all part of a ruse, allowing them to run the company smoothly in my parents' absence with the help of dedicated and skilled employees. While seemingly running the pizza shop, my parents were actually overseeing their work, earning the admiration of their staff. Under my mother's guidance, our company took control of the restaurant previously managed by my ex-father-in-law and Judson. The once complacent duo now stood stunned as my father calmly addressed them. "It's evident to me that both of you lack the necessary skills to manage your business," he declared, citing concerns voiced by employees regarding their management abilities. With a firm stance beside my father, my mother delivered a decisive message. "We're entrusting the management of the French restaurant to Todd. He has full authority over you both," she proclaimed. Ex-father-in-law and Judson protested, claiming their approval was needed, but their objections fell on deaf ears. This decision wasn't solely my parents' but also reflected the sentiments of the disgruntled employees. Now, my ex-mother-in-law would support Todd, her nephew, in a supervisory role. Todd and my ex-mother-in-law shared a glance, and with calm determination, Todd expressed his gratitude for their support before revealing his true feelings. "While I owe you for taking me in as a child," Todd began, his voice turning icy, "my grudge against Judson is immeasurable. For him, it's even greater." His declaration left no room for forgiveness or mercy, stripping my ex-father-in-law and Judson of all managerial authority. Todd's cold resolve was clear. Then my ex-mother-in-law delivered a final blow, leaving my ex-father-in-law and Judson reeling. Upon returning to my parents' home about a month later, my ex-father-in-law and ex-husband Judson appeared, their faces drained of color. They delivered divorce papers and a curt message, claiming they were cutting ties with us. Maintaining composure, I faced my ex-father-in-law and remarked on the unfortunate timing of our late-life divorce. My laughter seemed to unnerve Judson further, who muttered about employees quitting and feeling betrayed by Todd, his supposed brother. But Todd's voice, cutting and cold, interrupted Judson's self-pity. He rejected the brotherly title Judson had bestowed upon him, revealing he had never considered Judson as such. Suddenly, Todd emerged, stunning my ex-father-in-law and Judson. Then my former mother-in-law appeared quietly from the shadows. As my ex-in-laws stood dumbfounded, my mother made a bold entrance, revealing that they had been scouted by her company and that they now owned the French restaurant. My ex-father-in-law broke into a cold sweat at this declaration, while my father, observing the scene, smiled modestly. He revealed that running the pizza shop had merely been a hobby. My wife's family owned a group of restaurants, and they had graciously accepted him as their son-in-law. At the mention of the company's name, my ex-father-in-law and Judson stumbled, realizing the vast difference in scale between their restaurants and our company. It became clear why they had been relegated to running a pizza shop instead of being involved in the family business. Years ago, my father had suffered a collapse from overworking, prompting doctors to suggest he pursue something he enjoyed for his recovery. So my mother and I had reopened this pizza shop, which had been my late grandfather's hobby. In truth, it was all part of a ruse, allowing them to run the company smoothly in my parents' absence with the help of dedicated and skilled employees.
I'm Anna, the afterthought in a family of geniuses. My parents, both big shots at the university, had their lives all mapped out. Then I showed up, uninvited and unexpected. We found out too late, Mom would often say, her voice thick with regret. By the time we knew, it was already too late for other options. My sister Sarah and I were born just 11 months apart. We looked like twins, but that's where the similarities ended. She was the brain, I was the heart. From day one, it was clear who the favorite was. "Look, John. Sarah's reading already," Mom exclaimed one day when I was about 3. Sarah sat in the corner, nose buried in a book meant for kids twice her age. That pretty much set the tone for our childhood. Sarah devoured books, I devoured life. She memorized complex texts, I struggled to remember what I had for breakfast. I was diligent, hardworking. But no matter how hard I worked, it never seemed to be enough. "Anna," Mom said one day, exasperation clear in her voice, "how many times do I have to explain this? It's simple addition." I stared at the numbers, willing them to make sense. But they danced across the page, mocking me. Meanwhile, Sarah breezed through her advanced math homework in the next room. But where I lacked in academics, I made up for in personality. I was the class clown, the life of the party. My laughter was infectious, to everyone except my parents. One evening at dinner, I was telling a joke I'd heard at school. And then the chicken said, "Anna." Mom's sharp voice cut through my story. "Enough. Laughing for no reason is a sign of low intelligence. Please control yourself." I felt my cheeks burn with shame. Across the table, Sarah smirked, her eyes never leaving her book on quantum physics. As elementary school progressed, the divide only deepened. Sarah collected academic awards like they were going out of style. Me? I was lucky if I got a gold star for attendance. I'll never forget the day of the school science fair in 5th grade. Sarah's project on cellular mitosis won first place. Mine, well, let's just say my baking soda volcano didn't exactly erupt as planned. As we drove home, the car filled with praise for Sarah's achievement. I sat in the back, covered in dried baking soda, feeling smaller by the minute. "Well," Dad finally said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror, "I suppose not everyone in the family can be scientifically inclined." Mom nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's clear Anna doesn't have the aptitude for it. What will our colleagues think?" I sank lower in my seat, wishing I could disappear. That was the moment I realized I'd never be able to maintain their precious status in the scientific community. In their eyes, I was the disappointment, the one who couldn't carry on their legacy. As we got older, the gap between Sarah and me only widened. Sarah was whisked off to science camps, math competitions, and academic decathlons. Me? I was left with our elderly babysitter, Mrs. Jenkins. But you know what? Mrs. Jenkins was a godsend. While my parents were grooming Sarah to be the next Einstein, Mrs. Jenkins was teaching me skills that would serve me well in the real world. "Come on, Anna," she'd say, her wrinkled hands guiding mine as we kneaded dough. "Let me show you how to make a pie that'll knock their socks off." Other days, we'd clip coupons and plan grocery lists. "Listen here, girl," she'd say, her eyes twinkling. "Knowing how to stretch a dollar is just as important as knowing how to split an atom." But the best lessons came during our heart-to-heart talks. "Anna, sweetie," she said one day as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "Not everyone's born a genius, but everyone can make the world a little better. You remember that." Those words became my lifeline in a house where I never seemed to measure up. At school, Sarah continued to shine. She participated in every academic competition, bringing home trophies and medals that Mom would display proudly in the living room. My report cards, on the other hand, were hidden away in a drawer, never to see the light of day. High school was a struggle. While Sarah breezed through AP classes and SAT prep, I was just trying to keep my head above water. Math was my nemesis, and no matter how hard I tried, the numbers just wouldn't cooperate. The day we got our SAT scores was the final straw. Sarah, of course, had aced it. Me? Let's just say my score wouldn't be getting me into any colleges. A dumbass. "That's what you are," Dad yelled, waving my score report in my face. "How can you be so stupid? It's simple addition, for God's sake." Mom stood by, shaking her head in disgust. "And Sarah?" She leaned against the doorframe, a smug smile playing on her lips. Not once did she step in to defend me. Not once did she offer to help. She just watched, probably thinking how lucky she was to be the smart one. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, as my parents continued their tirade. "You can't even add 2 plus 2. How do you expect to get into college? To make something of yourself?" Their words cut deep, each one a reminder of how I'd never be good enough. But somewhere in the midst of their shouting, I felt something else stirring. Anger, determination, a fierce desire to prove them wrong. As I lay in bed that night, their harsh words still ringing in my ears, I made a decision. I might not be cut out for college, at least not right now. But that didn't mean I couldn't make something of myself. The day after graduation, I marched into Sunny's supermarket and got myself a job as a cashier. It wasn't glamorous, but you know what? For the first time in my life, I had something that was all my own. Within weeks, I was pulling in my own paychecks. I told my parents I'd found a job, but they barely looked up from their papers. They didn't ask where or what I was doing, and honestly, I was relieved. At least this way, they couldn't disapprove. I was still living at home, but now I had my own money. It wasn't much, but it was enough to have a little fun without having to beg my parents for cash. "Anna, you coming to the beach this weekend?" My friend and co-worker from the store Lisa would call, and I'd grin, knowing I could say yes without worrying about the cost. While Sarah spent her summer buried in textbooks, preparing for her first semester at some fancy Ivy League school, I was living it up. Weekends at the beach, movie nights with friends, impromptu road trips, I was finally free to be me. Weeks turned into months, and I settled into my new life. Sure, it wasn't the life my parents had envisioned for me, but I was happy. Really happy. Then came that day. The day that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the store was quiet, and I was restocking the gum display when I heard the automatic doors swish open. I looked up, my customary greeting on my lips, and froze. There, looking as prim and proper as ever, was my mother. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I saw the shock in her eyes, followed quickly by embarrassment. She turned, clearly intending to leave without a word. But some part of me, some naive, hopeful part, called out, "Mom, hey." She turned slowly, her face a mask of disdain. "Anna," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment, "what are you doing here?" I gestured to my name tag, trying to keep my voice light. "I work here. Have been for a few months now." Her eyes narrowed. "A saleswoman? Really, Anna? The daughter of a professor, reduced to this?" She waved her hand dismissively at the store around us. "What will our colleagues think if they find out my daughter is the lowest rung on the social ladder?" Her words hit me like a slap. I'd been proud of my independence, of earning my own way. But in her eyes, I was just an embarrassment. "I'm working honestly," I managed to say, my voice small. "I'm not doing anything wrong." But Mom was beyond reason. Her voice rose, drawing the attention of the few customers in the store. "You will quit this job immediately, do you hear me? I will not have you embarrassing our family like this. And you can forget about living under our roof if this is the path you choose." I stood there, rooted to the spot, as she stormed out of the store. The automatic doors swished closed behind her, leaving a deafening silence in her wake. That night, I returned home with a heavy heart and tear-stained cheeks. The house was quiet, but the silence felt oppressive. Without a word, I went to my room and started packing. As I was zipping up my last suitcase, Mom appeared in the doorway. Instead of the concern I'd foolishly hoped for, her face showed only relief. "So, you finally decided to leave," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Good, it's for the best." Dad appeared behind her, nodding in agreement. "Remember to change your surname," he added. We can't have you disgracing our family name with your choices." Their words stung, but I was beyond tears now. "Fine," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'll take Grandpa's name. At least he knew how to love unconditionally." I grabbed my bags and walked out, not looking back. They didn't ask for my new address, and I didn't offer it. The next day, I moved in with Lisa. We'd become fast friends over the past few months, and when I told her what happened, she didn't hesitate to offer me her spare room. One lazy Sunday afternoon, as Lisa and I were scrolling through social media, I came across Sarah's profile. My finger hesitated over the unfollow button, but curiosity got the better of me. Sarah's feed was a parade of achievements. Photos of her receiving awards, status updates about her latest research breakthroughs, announcements of her admission to elite scientific societies. Each post had hundreds of likes and comments, all singing her praises. "Your sister?" Lisa asked, peering over my shoulder. "Have you talked to her recently?" I shook my head, remembering our last interaction. It was a few weeks after I'd left home. In a moment of weakness, I'd reached out to Sarah, suggesting we meet for coffee. Her response was cold and dismissive. "Anna, I'm afraid we don't have much in common anymore. Our interests and, frankly, our levels of development are quite different now. I don't think meeting would be productive for either of us." That was the last time we communicated directly. Despite the rift with my immediate family, I stayed in touch with my extended relatives. Aunt Martha, in particular, became a source of comfort and connection to my roots. During one of our regular phone calls, she let slip some information that simultaneously hurt and validated my decision to leave. "Oh, Anna," she sighed, her voice heavy with sadness. "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but your parents, they always ask if you'll be at family gatherings. If we say yes, they refuse to come. They say it's because you're beneath their status now, and they can't bear to be in the same room as you." I felt a familiar ache in my chest, but it was duller now. "It's okay, Aunt Martha," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. "I'm happy with my life now. If they can't accept that, it's their loss." And it was true. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had a job I enjoyed, friends who accepted me for who I was, and a growing sense of self-worth that had nothing to do with academic achievements or social status. 5 years had passed since I'd walked out of my parents' house, and life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. I'd been promoted to assistant manager at the store, my circle of friends had grown, and I'd even started taking some online classes in business management. I was content, but something was missing. That all changed on a balmy summer evening. My friends had organized a beach bonfire, and I noticed him. He was standing a little apart from the group, looking slightly out of place in his button-down shirt and khakis. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. They seemed to sparkle with curiosity as he took in the scene around him. I made my way over, extending my hand. "Hi, I'm Anna. You look like you could use a S more." He laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made me smile. "I'm David. And yes, I could definitely use a S more. It's been years since I've had one." As we roasted marshmallows, we got to talking. Turns out, David was an environmental scientist, fresh off a research expedition in the Amazon. We talked for hours that night, about everything and nothing. David was fascinated by my stories of customer service adventures, and I was enthralled by his passion for the environment. As the weeks turned into months, David and I grew closer. He didn't care that I hadn't gone to college or that I worked as a saleswoman. He loved my quick wit, my ability to make friends with anyone, and what he called my refreshing perspective on life. I met his family at a dinner party 6 months into our relationship. I was nervous, after all, they were all accomplished scientists. But to my surprise, they welcomed me with open arms. Throughout the evening, they asked about my job, my interests, my dreams. Not once did they ask about my education or my family background. It was refreshing. A year to the day after we met, David proposed. It was nothing grand, just the two of us, on the same beach where we'd first talked. But it was perfect. We planned a small wedding, just close friends and family. As I addressed the invitations, I hesitated over 3 names: Mom, Dad, and Sarah. Despite everything, a part of me still hoped. But the RSVPs came back, and those 3 remained silent. Life with David was everything I'd ever dreamed of and more. We'd settled into a cozy routine, balancing his research work with my job at the store. But as content as I was, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant for something more. That something more came on a lazy Sunday afternoon at David's parents' house. We were all lounging in the backyard, enjoying the warm sunshine and cold lemonade, when the conversation turned to David's latest research. "The amount of plastic waste we're producing is staggering," David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "And the worst part is, most of it ends up in landfills or the ocean." His father nodded gravely. "It's a crisis, no doubt about it. But what can we do? People aren't going to stop using plastic overnight." As they continued discussing the problem, an idea started forming in my mind. Years of working retail had taught me a thing or two about what people want and need. And all those hours I'd spent with Mrs. Jenkins, learning to be resourceful and creative, suddenly came rushing back. Before I knew it, I was grabbing a napkin and a pen from the table. "What if," I started, my voice trembling with excitement, "what if we could turn that plastic waste into something useful? Something people actually want?" 3 pairs of eyes turned to me, curious. Encouraged, I continued, sketching rapidly on the napkin. "Like this," I said, holding up my crude drawing. "Garden furniture made entirely from recycled plastic. Durable, weather-resistant, and eco-friendly. We could even make it modular, so people can customize their own designs." The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, I feared I'd overstepped, that they'd laugh at my silly idea. But then, "Anna," David's father said slowly, his eyes wide with amazement, that's brilliant." David was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. "Do you know how many environmental problems this could solve? And the market potential, it's enormous." His mother chimed in, "And it's not just garden furniture. Think of all the urban applications, park benches, playground equipment, even building materials." What happened next was a whirlwind. David's parents, excited by the potential of the idea, offered to invest in making it a reality. Before I knew it, we were setting up a company, with me, yes, me, Anna Holloway, former family disappointment, as the CEO. David, with his scientific background, took charge of developing the technology to recycle and mold the plastic efficiently. I focused on design and marketing, drawing on my years of customer service experience to create products people would love. 6 months after that fateful Sunday afternoon, we launched our first line of garden furniture. The response was overwhelming. People loved the sleek designs, the eco-friendly concept, and the story behind it all. Encouraged by our success, we expanded our range. Urban planners started reaching out, interested in using our recycled plastic products for city projects. And then, the call that changed everything, the mayor's office wanted to meet with us. We met and signed a contract for the improvement of the city. 3 years had passed since that fateful day in David's parents' backyard. Our company, EcoRenew, had grown beyond our wildest dreams. We'd recycled tons of plastic waste, transformed city parks, and even started branching out into eco-friendly building materials. And now, here we were, about to receive a state award for innovation and environmental impact. As David and I stood in the grand ballroom, surrounded by the crème de la crème of the scientific and business world, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. We made our way through the crowd, stopping to chat with various dignitaries and fellow innovators. I was in the middle of a conversation with the city's head of urban development when I saw them. My parents and Sarah, standing near the refreshment table. They looked different. Mom and Dad had aged considerably, their hair more gray than I remembered. And Sarah, always so put together, looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. For a moment, our eyes met across the room. I saw the shock register on their faces, clearly not expecting to see me in such a setting. I turned to David, linking my arm through his. "Let's go find your parents," I said, perhaps a bit louder than necessary. As we walked past my family, I kept my eyes forward, chin held high. We found David's parents near the stage, beaming with pride. As we chatted about the upcoming ceremony, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. My mother was approaching, her eyes fixed on David's mom. "Excuse me," I heard her say, her voice sickly sweet. "I couldn't help but notice your lovely family. You must be so proud of your son and his wife?" I tensed, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But my mother-in-law just smiled warmly. "Oh, we are. Anna is a remarkable woman. We're lucky to have her in our family." As she walked back to my father and Sarah, I could see them huddling together, whispering furiously. I caught snippets of their conversation. "Can't believe it's her. Married into a family of scientists. Probably just here as his plus one." The moment had finally arrived. As the presenter called my name, announcing EcoRenew as the recipient of the State Environmental Innovation Award, I felt a surge of pride. I walked onto the stage, my heart pounding with excitement. As I reached for the microphone, ready to deliver the speech I'd carefully prepared, chaos erupted. My mother rushed onto the stage. Before I could react, she had grabbed my arm and snatched the microphone from my hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice quavering with emotion, "I am the proud mother of this brilliant, worthy woman." She gestured dramatically towards me. "We always knew Anna would become someone extraordinary." I stood there, frozen in disbelief, as she continued her performance, even managing to squeeze out a few tears. The audience, recognizing the famous Professor Anderson, broke into applause. In that moment, rage and hurt bubbled up inside me, years of neglect, disappointment, and rejection crystallizing into a single, burning point of resolve. I would not let her steal this moment. I gently but firmly took the microphone back from her. "Thank you, Mother," I said, my voice steady, despite the storm of emotions inside me. "If I could have a moment of silence, please." The room hushed, all eyes on me. "Yes, I am the daughter of the renowned Professors Anderson," I began, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "But I stand before you today not because of them, but despite them." I saw shock ripple through the audience, my mother's face paling beside me. I recounted the years of missed school events, of being told I was an embarrassment, of being asked to change my name and move out. I worked as a saleswoman, hiding my identity, because my own parents were ashamed of me. The room was dead silent, hanging on every word. But today, I stand before you not as a failure, but as a success. Not because of my family name, but because of the family I chose. I looked towards David and his parents, seeing tears in their eyes. My husband, David, and his wonderful parents saw potential in me when no one else did. They encouraged my ideas, supported my dreams. It's thanks to them that EcoRenew exists, that we've been able to make a difference in our environment and our community. I gestured for David to join me on stage. As he walked up, I saw my father and Sarah slip out of the hall, unable to bear the scrutiny of the crowd. "This award," I continued, holding up the plaque, "is a testament to what can happen when you believe in someone, when you nurture their potential instead of crushing their spirit. It's proof that intelligence comes in many forms, and that kindness and support can change lives." I turned to my mother, still standing shell-shocked beside me. "I'm sorry, but I can't accept your sudden pride in me. You lost that right years ago." "My real family is here," I said, putting my arm around David. The hall erupted in applause, people rising to their feet. I saw tears, heard whispers of admiration and support. David's parents were openly crying, beaming with pride. In the days that followed, I heard through the grapevine that my parents and Sarah were facing backlash in their academic circles. People were shocked by their treatment of me, and many were reconsidering their associations with them. Part of me felt guilty for exposing them, for complicating their lives, as they put it. But a stronger part knew that I had done nothing wrong. I had simply told the truth, a truth that had been silenced for far too long. As for me, life went on. Renew continued to grow and innovate. David and I started talking about starting a family of our own. And every day, I woke up grateful for the life I had built, for the family I had chosen, and for the strength I had found within myself. My name's Amelia, and I was born with cerebral palsy. Now, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, growing up wasn't exactly a walk in the park. My parents? Well, let's just say they had a hard time wrapping their heads around having a kid like me. My brain works just fine, but my spine's got a mind of its own, and my left arm? It's a bit of a slacker. All this adds up to make me look a bit different from your average Joe, or Jane, in my case. I remember those early days, even though I was just a tiny thing. My mom, she couldn't even bring herself to hold me at first. It was like I was some kind of alien or something. Instead, I had this nanny taking care of me. She was nice enough, I guess, but it wasn't the same as having your mom there, you know? The nanny was my grandmother's idea. Grandma, now there's a woman who knew how to love. She didn't give a damn about how I looked or moved. To her, I was just her granddaughter, plain and simple. She was loaded, which came in handy more times than I can count. As I got older, things didn't exactly improve on the home front. Walking was a real pain in the ass, literally. I'd take a few steps, then bam. Faceplant on the floor. And my mom? She'd just stand there, watching me struggle. You need to learn to get up on your own, Amelia, she'd say, not even trying to hide the disgust in her voice. But I wasn't stupid. I knew she just didn't want to touch me. It was like I had cooties or something. Things really took a turn when I hit the big 0 to 5. Mom got pregnant again, and 9 months later, out pops my little sister. Talk about a golden child. This kid was everything I wasn't: cute, bouncy, and most importantly to my mom, normal. From that day on, it was like I'd become invisible. Mom was all about her new baby girl. She'd spend hours taking selfies with her, posting them all over social media. Look at my beautiful daughter, she'd write, and I'd think, what about me? Aren't I your daughter too? As I got older, things didn't exactly improve on the mobility front. Crutches became my constant companions, and on bad days, I'd roll around in a wheelchair. It wasn't ideal, but hey, you gotta work with what you've got, right? My mom would always come up with these excuses why I couldn't go out. Oh, Amelia, it's not safe for you in other people's houses, she'd say. Or, the shopping center isn't equipped for someone like you, sweetie. But I wasn't born yesterday. Even at that young age, I could see right through her bullshit. It wasn't about my safety or comfort, she was just embarrassed to be seen with me. God forbid her friends see her with her special daughter. So, my childhood became a never-ending cycle of 4 walls and a ceiling. While my sister got to experience the world, make friends, and create memories, I was stuck at home, watching life pass me by through the window. My parents didn't even try to hide the fact that they hated going anywhere with me. It was like I was some kind of burden they were forced to carry. When school time rolled around, you'd think things might change, right? Fat chance. Instead of sending me to a regular school where I might actually interact with kids my age, my parents insisted that Grandma foot the bill for a specialized school. It's for the best, Amelia, Dad would say, not quite meeting my eyes. You'll be with kids who understand you better. What he really meant was, we don't want you embarrassing us at a normal school. But hey, who needs social skills and diverse experiences, am I right? So off I went, every day, driven by a nanny Grandma hired. Don't get me wrong, the nanny was nice enough, but it wasn't the same as having your mom or dad drop you off, you know? Now, Grandma, she was a whole different story. While my parents were busy pretending I didn't exist, Grandma was all about helping me thrive. Amelia, my dear, she'd say, her eyes twinkling, how about we take a little trip this weekend? And just like that, I'd find myself on adventures I never thought possible. We'd visit museums, go to the park, even take short trips to nearby cities. For the first time in my life, I felt like a normal kid. Grandma didn't stop there, though. She was determined to give me every opportunity to improve. Massages, physical therapy, experimental treatments, you name it, she paid for it. With the right care, there's nothing you can't do, Amelia, she'd tell me, her voice full of conviction. You're going to have a wonderful life, full of friends and joy. You'll see. I remember this one time, after a particularly grueling therapy session, I was feeling pretty down on myself. Grandma noticed, of course, she always did. What's wrong, sweetheart? She asked, sitting down next to me. Why bother with all this, Grandma? I said, gesturing at my uncooperative body. It's not like I'm ever going to be normal. She took my face in her hands, forcing me to look at her. Amelia, listen to me. There's no such thing as normal. Everyone's got their own struggles, their own challenges. Yours are just a bit more visible, that's all. But that doesn't make you any less worthy of love, of friendship, of a full and happy life. You hear me? That was Grandma for you. Always ready with a hug, a word of encouragement, or a surprise treat. She believed in me when no one else did, not even myself. And slowly but surely, I started to believe too. It was Grandma's birthday, and she dropped a bombshell on us. She wanted to celebrate at a fancy restaurant. Now, for most families, this wouldn't be a big deal. But for us? It was like she'd suggested we all go skydiving. The next day, Mom came into my room with a forced smile. Amelia, honey, Grandma's having a birthday dinner at a restaurant. But you're not feeling well, right? It's probably best if you stay home. I knew the drill. I was supposed to nod and agree, be the good, understanding daughter. But something in me snapped. Actually, Mom, I feel fine. I'd love to go to Grandma's dinner. The color drained from her face. Oh, but the restaurant might not be accessible. And you know how tired you get. It's really better if you stay home. Before I could argue, the doorbell rang. Mom's eyes widened in panic. That's Grandma. Quick, get in bed and pretend you're sick. But it was too late. Grandma bustled in, took one look at me sitting up in my wheelchair, and smiled knowingly. There's my girl. All ready for dinner, I see. Mom started sputtering some excuse about me being ill, but Grandma wasn't having it. She walked right up to me, put her hand on my head, and declared, doesn't feel like a fever to me. Come on, Amelia, let's get you to that restaurant. And just like that, we were all piling into Grandma's car, me in my wheelchair, my sister in her frilly new dress, and my parents looking like they were headed to a funeral instead of a birthday celebration. The restaurant was buzzing when we arrived. I saw relatives I hadn't seen in years, and to my surprise, they seemed genuinely happy to see me. As we settled in for dinner, I couldn't help but notice how Mom positioned herself as far from me as possible. She was chatting and laughing with everyone else, but it was like I didn't exist. I tried my best to eat neatly, I really did. But sometimes my hand just doesn't cooperate, you know? I saw Mom wince every time I dropped food or made a mess. Grandma, bless her heart, didn't miss a beat. She helped me when I needed it, chatted with me like I was the most interesting person at the table, and made sure I was comfortable. At one point, she called out Mom. Susan, why aren't you helping Amelia with her meal? Mom's face flushed red. She quickly scooped up my sister and plastered on a fake smile. Oh, I can't manage both girls at once, Mom. You know how it is. I saw the flash of anger in Grandma's eyes, but before she could say anything, Dad stood up abruptly. Well, this has been lovely, but I think it's time we headed home. Amelia looks tired. I wasn't tired. I was having the time of my life. But I knew better than to argue. As Dad wheeled me out, I caught sight of Grandma's face. She looked sad and disappointed, but she gave me a little wink. It was her way of saying, don't worry, I've got your back. As we drove home in silence, I couldn't help but think about the evening. Yeah, it had been awkward and uncomfortable at times. But for a few brief moments, I'd felt like part of a real family. And you know what? that feeling was worth all the awkwardness in the world. The feeling of awkwardness accompanied me all my childhood. Whenever we had visitors, the normal people my parents actually wanted to associate with, I'd get the same old song and dance. "Amelia," Mom would say, her voice sickly sweet, "why don't you go to your room for a bit? We're having company." At first, it stung. But over time I got used to it. So, I'd will myself into my room, shut the door, and wait. I'd hear the laughter, the chatter, the sounds of a normal family having a normal time. And I'd sit there, alone, trying not to feel like a freak in my own home. But you know what? I'm nothing if not adaptable. I taught myself to cook, even though my hands shook and I dropped more than a few plates along the way. I learned to draw, pouring my feelings onto paper when I couldn't express them out loud. And I wrote. Boy, did I write. Poems mostly, little snippets of emotion that I could never quite say out loud. The funny thing is, for a while there, I thought I had an ally in all this. My little sister, when she was just a tiny thing, she used to love me. Like, really love me. She'd toddle into my room, all big eyes and chubby cheeks, and just want to be near me. I remember this one time, she must have been about 3. She came into my room while I was drawing. "Mia," she squealed, she couldn't quite manage Amelia yet. "Draw me." So I did. It wasn't great, mind you, a wobbly circle for a head, stick arms, and legs. But to her, it was a masterpiece. She hugged that paper like it was made of gold. But then Mom walked in. The look on her face when she saw her precious baby girl cuddled up next to me? You'd think she'd caught her playing in mud. "Sarah," she snapped. "Come here, get away from your sister." Sarah looked confused. "But Mommy, Mia drawing me." Mom snatched the picture away. "That's nice, honey, but let's go play in your room instead, okay?" And just like that, it started. Every time Sarah tried to get close to me, Mom would pull her away. Like I was contagious or something. And over time? Well, Sarah learned. She stopped coming to my room, stopped asking me to play or draw for her. By the time she hit her teens, she was just like Mom. I'd hear her giggling with her friends in the living room, but I knew better than to go out there. One day, I wheeled myself out to get a glass of water, forgetting she had friends over. The look of horror on her face when she saw me? It was like looking at a mini version of Mom. "Amelia," she hissed. "Go back to your room. My friends are here." And just like that, I was back in my sanctuary, my prison, my room. But you know what? It didn't hurt as much as it used to. Because in that room, I wasn't Amelia the freak, Amelia the embarrassment. I was just Amelia. The girl who could cook a mean omelet, draw pictures that made people smile, even if those people were just me and Grandma, and write poems that captured all the things I couldn't say out loud. Meanwhile, life went on, and graduation came. Man, what a mix of emotions that was. There I was, surrounded by my classmates, other special kids like me. And you know what? For once, I felt normal. We were all different in our own ways, but here, in this moment, we were the same. Kids who'd made it despite the odds. I remember looking around at all the smiling faces, the proud parents, the teary-eyed teachers. And for a moment, just a moment, I let myself feel proud too. I'd done it. Despite everything, I'd actually done it. But then reality came crashing back. My eyes scanned the crowd, searching for familiar faces. Mom, Dad, Sarah? Nope, nope, and nope. They were probably sipping cocktails on some beach right about now, enjoying their much-needed family vacation. Funny how their idea of family never seemed to include me. But you know who was there? Grandma. Front and center, beaming like I'd just won the Nobel Prize or something. When they called my name, I swear her cheers were loud enough to shake the rafters. Fast forward a few months, and suddenly the house was buzzing with excitement. Mom and Dad's 20th wedding anniversary was coming up, and they'd decided to go all out. They were making a whole damn movie about their happy family life. I remember thinking, well, this should be interesting. For 2 weeks straight, it was like living in some bizarre reality show. We were dragged from location to location, the local entertainment center, some picturesque nature spot, even a yacht. Where'd they even get a yacht? We'd change clothes more times than I could count, pose for endless photos, record cheesy congratulations, and even sing songs. It was exhausting, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't also kind of fun. For once, I was included. Sure, Mom would fuss about how to position my wheelchair so it looked natural, and Dad would get this pinched look on his face whenever the photographer had to take extra time to get me in the shot. But I was there. I was part of it. I even wrote a special poem for Mom and Dad. Spent weeks on it, actually. Agonized over every word, practicing in front of my mirror until I could recite it without stumbling. When it came time to record it, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Mom, Dad, I started, my voice shaky but determined. 20 years of love and life, of joy and strife. Through all the ups and downs, you've stood strong, a testament to love's enduring song. I kept going, pouring my heart out in verse. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. I looked up, half expecting to see tears in their eyes or something. Instead, Mom was fussing with Sarah's hair, and Dad was checking his watch. That was nice, Amelia, Mom said, not quite meeting my eyes. Very creative. Now, let's get Sarah set up for her piano piece, shall we? And just like that, my moment was over. But you know what? I didn't let it get me down. Because for those 2 weeks, I'd been part of something. I'd contributed. And even if they couldn't appreciate it, I knew I'd done something special. The big day was approaching fast. The director had been working his magic, weaving together our new footage with clips from the family archives. I was buzzing with excitement, eager to see how it all came together. When the finished product arrived, I wheeled myself into the living room, ready for the grand unveiling. But Mom quickly intercepted me. "Oh, Amelia," she said, that fake sweetness coating her words like cheap syrup, "we're saving it for the party. You'll see it with everyone else. It'll be more special that way." Finally, the day of the anniversary party arrived. Grandma's place was decked out like something out of a movie itself. Her sprawling lawn had been transformed into an outdoor cinema, with plush pillows scattered across the grass for seating. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over everything, guests started to arrive. "All right, everyone," Dad called out, clinking his glass for attention. "If you'd all like to take a seat, we're about to start the show." There was a flurry of movement as people settled onto the pillows. I stayed in my wheelchair, parked next to Grandma. She gave my hand a squeeze as the movie began to play. The opening shot was of Mom and Dad on their wedding day. They looked so young, so happy. Mom's dress was beautiful, and Dad couldn't take his eyes off her. I felt a lump form in my throat. Then came a montage of their early years together. Vacations, parties, lazy Sundays at home. They looked so in love, so carefree. I searched each frame, waiting for my entrance. But as the timeline of their lives unfolded on the screen, a sinking feeling began to grow in my stomach. There were shots of them with friends, with colleagues, with other family members. But I was nowhere to be seen. Then came footage of Mom's pregnancy, and my heart leapt. This is it, I thought. This is where I come in. But no. The next shot was of Sarah as a newborn, Mom cradling her with a look of pure adoration. Dad hovering proudly nearby. The movie continued, showing Sarah growing up. Her first steps, first day of school, dance recitals, family vacations. It was like watching a parallel universe where I didn't exist. Then came the footage from our recent shoots. I held my breath, waiting to see myself on screen. There was our family, singing and dancing, looking like the picture-perfect unit. But I wasn't there. It was as if I'd been erased, cut out of every frame. As the reality of what I was seeing sank in, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't some mistake or oversight. This was deliberate. They'd erased me. My own family had wiped me from their history. Grandma took one look at my face and something in her snapped. She marched over to the projector and shut it off. The lawn was plunged into an awkward silence. "Susan, David," Grandma's voice cut through the night air like a knife. "What the hell is this?" The guests started murmuring uncomfortably. Dad stepped forward, trying to calm things down. "Now, Mom, let's not make a scene." But Grandma was just getting started. "Make a scene? You want to talk about making a scene? How about erasing your child from your family history? That's one hell of a scene if you ask me." Mom's face had gone pale. "It's not like that," she stammered. "The photographer said Amelia wasn't photogenic. We were just trying to put our best foot forward." Grandma let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, that's rich, Susan. Shall we talk about how you wanted to abandon her the day she was born? How I had to promise financial support just to get you to keep your own child?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. I felt like I was going to be sick. "I've supported this family for years," Grandma continued. "Paid for your vacations, your luxuries. All I asked was that you love your daughter. And you couldn't even do that." Suddenly, Sarah jumped up. "Shut up," she screamed. "Just shut up. Amelia's a cripple. She's embarrassing. I didn't want her in the video either." The silence that followed was deafening. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own sister. Grandma turned to my parents, her voice cold. "Well done. You've raised one daughter to be just as intolerant as you are." Then she dropped the bombshell. "You know what? I'm done. Amelia is now my sole heir. Every penny I have will go to her." Mom exploded. "Are you insane? What does she need money for? She needs a full-time nurse, not a fortune." "Get out," Grandma said quietly. When they didn't move, she repeated it louder. "Get out of my house. Get out of my life. I'm done supporting your comfortable little existence." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Mom laughed nervously. "Come on, Mom. You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life," Grandma cut her off. "Leave. Now. And don't come back." It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. My parents and Sarah, looking shell-shocked, gathered their things and left. Grandma slammed the door behind them with a finality that echoed across the lawn. As the dust settled, I became aware of movement around me. The guests, who had witnessed this whole ugly scene, were approaching me one by one. Aunt Karen hugged me tightly. Uncle Jim patted my shoulder awkwardly but sincerely. Even some of my parents' friends, people who had never so much as looked at me before, came up to express their support. So, there I was, suddenly living in Grandma's big house. Talk about a plot twist, right? It was like stepping into a whole new world, one where I wasn't a dirty little secret to be hidden away, but a person worthy of love and respect. About a week after the great family meltdown, that's what I started calling it in my head, Grandma sat me down for a chat. "All right, Amelia," she said, that familiar twinkle in her eye. "Let's talk about your future. What do you want to do with your life?" I blinked at her, caught off guard. No one had ever really asked me that before. It was always assumed I'd just exist, I guess. Be taken care of. But never have dreams of my own. "I don't know," I stammered. "I never thought." "Well, start thinking," Grandma said, not unkindly. "The world's your oyster now, kiddo. What do you love doing?" And just like that, it hit me. "I love writing," I said, my voice growing stronger. "And drawing. I want to create things, Grandma. Beautiful things." Grandma's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Well, why didn't you say so? We'll get you into the best damn art and literature program we can find." Before I knew it, I was enrolled in the literature department of a nearby college. Grandma had made sure the campus was fully accessible, and even hired a part-time assistant to help me with any physical tasks I couldn't manage. That first day of college, I was terrified. I kept waiting for the stares, the whispers, the pitying looks I'd grown so accustomed to. But they never came. Sure, people noticed my wheelchair, but it was with curiosity rather than judgment. And once they got to know me, the real me, not the shadow I'd been for so long, the wheelchair became just another part of who I was, not my defining feature. I threw myself into my studies with a passion I never knew I had. Literature opened up whole new worlds to me, and my professors encouraged me to explore my own voice through poetry. My art classes taught me new techniques, ways to express on paper the thoughts and feelings I'd kept bottled up for so long. And you know what? Turns out, I wasn't half bad at this stuff. My poems started winning competitions, my artwork was featured in student exhibitions. For the first time in my life, I was being seen for my abilities, not my disabilities. It wasn't all smooth sailing, of course. There were days when the pain, both physical and emotional, felt overwhelming. Days when I missed my parents and sister, despite everything. But I had Grandma, and I had my art, and slowly but surely, I was building a life for myself. Now, here I am, holding my very first published book of poetry in my hands. It's a slim volume, nothing fancy, but it's mine. Every word, every illustration, they all came from me. From my experiences, my pain, my joy, my growth. As I flip through the pages, I can't help but smile at the dedication. To Grandma, who taught me that being different isn't a flaw, it's a feature. And to everyone who's ever felt invisible, may you find the strength to make yourself seen. I guess I should start at the beginning. I'm Camilla, and I was born to Jack and Lisa, my parents. Dad was always busy with his business stuff, and Mom was a teacher at the local elementary school. For the first 9 years of my life, things were pretty normal. We lived in a cozy house in the suburbs, had family dinners, went on vacations, you know, the usual stuff. Dad was always working on some new business idea. He'd come home late, his head full of plans and dreams. Mom was the calm one, always there with a hug or a kind word. She'd help me with my homework, bake cookies with me on weekends, and tell me stories before bed. But then, when I was 9, everything fell apart. It was a regular Tuesday evening. I was in my room, playing with my dolls, when I heard shouting from downstairs. It wasn't the normal kind of arguing, this was different, scary. I crept down the stairs, my heart pounding. I saw Mom and Dad in the living room. Dad's face was red, and he was waving his arms around. Mom was crying, mascara running down her cheeks. "How could you, Lisa?" Dad yelled. "With Mark? My God, he's been to our house for dinner." Mom was sobbing now. "I'm sorry, Jack, it just happened. I didn't mean for it to." "Didn't mean for it to what? To destroy our family?" Dad's voice cracked. The next few weeks were a blur. There were hushed phone calls, meetings with people in suits, and a lot of crying, from both Mom and Dad. I didn't fully understand what was happening, but I knew it was bad. Then came the day Dad told me we were leaving. He knelt down in front of me, his eyes tired and sad. "Camilla, honey, you and I are going to be living somewhere else. We're leaving the house for your mom." "Why can't we stay here with Mom?" I asked, my lower lip trembling. Dad looked around the living room, his gaze lingering on the family photos. "It's complicated, sweetie. But we both love you very much. That will never change." As Dad and I drove away from our house, my stuffed animals and favorite books piled in the back seat, I felt like my whole world was crumbling. I didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning of a long, painful journey. Life with Dad turned out to be way different than I expected. At first, I thought we'd be struggling, you know? But Dad's business suddenly took off. Before I knew it, we were moving into this huge house, even bigger than our old one. It was weird, living somewhere so fancy when I still felt so messed up inside. Dad was working all the time. He'd leave before I woke up and come home after I was in bed. A lot of days, I'd end up at Grandma and Grandpa's house. That's Robert and Eleanor, Dad's parents. "Camilla, honey, come help me with these cookies," Grandma would say, trying to keep me busy. Grandpa would take me out to the garden, teaching me the names of all the plants. They were nice and all, but it wasn't the same as having my parents around. When Dad was home, he was different. Stricter, I guess. "Camilla, have you done your homework?" he'd ask as soon as he walked in the door. Or, "Camilla, your room's a mess. Clean it up before dinner." It was like he was trying to be both mom and dad, and not really managing either. But I gotta give it to him, he was trying. Every Sunday became what he called Daddy-Daughter Day. We'd go out and do stuff together, just the two of us. Mini golf was his favorite. He'd get so into it, acting all goofy and competitive. "Watch out, Camilla. I'm going for a hole-in-one," he'd shout, making me laugh despite myself. Sometimes we'd go get ice cream. I'd always get the triple chocolate fudge, and he'd pretend to be grossed out. "How can you eat that sugar bomb?" he'd ask, while secretly stealing spoonfuls when he thought I wasn't looking. Other times, we'd hit up the local museum. Dad would read every single plaque out loud, putting on different voices for each one. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, he'd say in this ridiculous pirate voice, making me giggle and the other visitors stare. When I turned 10, Dad signed me up for piano lessons. I wasn't too thrilled about it at first, but it turned out to be pretty cool. Dad would come to every recital, sitting in the front row with this big, goofy grin on his face. Even when I messed up, which was a lot, he'd be the first one on his feet, clapping like I'd just won a Grammy or something. But even with all that good stuff, I couldn't help missing Mom. Some nights, when Dad was working late, I'd pull out our old family photo albums. There was Mom, smiling in every picture. I'd trace her face with my finger, trying to remember what her laugh sounded like, or the smell of her perfume. Once a month, like clockwork, I'd get to see Mom. These court-ordered visits became the highlight of my calendar, circled in red and counted down to with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The first time I saw her after the split, it was awkward as hell. We just stood there, staring at each other like strangers. Then Mom burst into tears and pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. After that, our visits became a whirlwind of activities and indulgence. It was like Mom was trying to cram a month's worth of mothering into a single day. She'd take me shopping, buying me clothes that made me feel grown up and cool. I remember trying on this crop top and thinking I was hot shit. "You look beautiful, sweetie," Mom gushed. When I wore it home, Dad nearly had a heart attack. "Absolutely not," he said, his face turning red. "Go change, now." I stomped up to my room, furious. "Mom lets me wear it," I muttered. "Well, I'm not your mother," Dad shot back. The next visit, Mom took me to this fancy cafe. The kind of place with tiny sandwiches and waiters in bow ties. "Order whatever you want, honey," Mom said with a wink. I went nuts. Chocolate cake, ice cream sundae, 3 different kinds of soda. By the end, I was so hyped up on sugar I was practically vibrating. Dad wasn't thrilled when I came home bouncing off the walls. "What did she feed you?" he grumbled, watching me zoom around the living room. But the best visit was when Mom surprised me with a trip to Adventureland, the local amusement park. We rode every roller coaster twice, screaming our heads off and laughing until our sides hurt. As we sat on a bench, sharing a massive cotton candy, Mom got this faraway look in her eyes. "Remember when we used to have family picnics in the backyard?" she said softly. "Your dad would burn the burgers, and we'd end up eating ice cream for dinner." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Those memories seemed like they belonged to someone else now. Mom squeezed my hand. "I miss those days, Camilla. I miss you. Maybe someday we could be a family again." My heart leapt at her words. "Really?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "We'll see, sweetie. We'll see." For weeks after, I'd daydream about moving back in with Mom, about our family being whole again. But then I'd look at Dad, see him trying so hard to make pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, and feel guilty for even thinking about leaving. Just before my 12th birthday, Mom dropped a bombshell. She was getting married to Mark. Yeah, that Mark, with whom she'd had an affair with. The wedding was like something out of a fairy tale. Mom looked stunning in her white gown, and Mark, well, he looked happy. I stood there in my frilly bridesmaid dress, watching them exchange vows, and felt torn in two. Part of me was happy for Mom. She was glowing, laughing in a way I hadn't seen in years. But another part of me couldn't help thinking about Dad, alone in our big empty house, probably buried in work or binge watching some crappy TV show. After Mom and Mark's wedding, things started to change. Our visits took on a new flavor. Mark was always there now, hovering in the background like an eager puppy. He'd ruffle my hair and say stuff like, "I always dreamed of having a daughter just like you, Camilla." It was nice, I guess. Weird, but nice. And the way Mom would beam at him when he said it, like he'd just handed her the moon or something, well, that made me feel good too. Like maybe this whole messed up situation could work out after all. Mom started talking more and more about me living with them. She'd go on and on about this room they were planning for me. "It'll have a window seat, Camilla," she'd say, her eyes sparkling. "Just like you always wanted. And we can paint it any color you like." I'd nod and smile, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. It felt like betraying Dad to even think about it. Our shopping sprees became less frequent. Instead, we'd have these big family dinners at their place. Mark would cook, he wasn't half bad, actually, and then regale us with stories about his work. Mom would hang on his every word, and I'd sit there, pushing food around my plate, feeling like a third wheel in my own family. When I turned 14, everything kicked into high gear. Mom started calling me every week, sometimes more. She'd show up at my school events unannounced, bringing me flowers or taking me out for ice cream after. "You know, Camilla," she'd say, stirring her coffee, "you're old enough now to decide where you want to live. The courts would listen to you." I'd freeze up every time she brought it up. Part of me wanted to jump at the chance, to go back to the way things were before. But another part wasn't so sure anymore. One day, she showed up at my debate club meeting. I was in the middle of arguing about climate change when I saw her slip into the back of the room. After it was over, she rushed up to me, beaming. "Oh, Camilla, you were wonderful," she gushed. "You know, if you lived with us, you could join the debate team at your new school. They're state champions." I felt my stomach clench. "Mom, just think about it, okay," she said, squeezing my arm. "We want you home with us." As I watched her leave, I felt torn in two. Home. What did that even mean anymore? That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought about Mom and her new perfect life with Mark. I thought about Dad, working himself to the bone to give me everything I needed. I was 14 years old, and the weight of the world felt like it was on my shoulders. How was I supposed to choose? How could I possibly make a decision that wouldn't hurt someone I loved? My 15th birthday was coming up, and instead of being excited, I was dreading it. Mom and Dad were at each other's throats about who would host my party. It all came to a head at this family dinner at Dad's place. "She's been living with me for years, Lisa," Dad growled, stabbing his fork into his steak. "Of course I'm hosting her party." Mom's eyes flashed. "She's my daughter too, Jack. I have a right to celebrate her birthday." I just sat there, pushing my peas around my plate, wishing I could disappear. Then Mom dropped the bomb. "Camilla," she said, her voice suddenly soft, "you're old enough now to decide where you want to live. Who do you choose?" The room went dead silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, Mom's hopeful, Dad's hurt, Mark's expectant. My throat closed up. I couldn't breathe. "I want to live with Mom," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The look on Dad's face. God, I'll never forget it. It was like I'd reached into his chest and ripped out his heart. He just crumpled. Before I knew it, I was packing my bags. Mom and Mark were over the moon, helping me move my stuff into their place. Dad just stood in the doorway, watching, his eyes hollow. "You can come back anytime, Pumpkin," he said as I left. Anytime. The first few weeks at Mom and Mark's were like a dream. They took me shopping for my new room, letting me pick out this super expensive, trendy bedroom set. They enrolled me in this fancy private school, Westfield Academy. "You'll get a top-notch education here," Mom gushed. "This is the start of a bright future, Camilla." And the family game nights? They were a blast. We'd play Monopoly or Catan, laughing and trash-talking each other. For a while, I thought I'd made the right choice. But then, things started to change. It started small. Mom making comments about my clothes or my hair. "Honey, are you sure you want to wear that? It's not very flattering." Or, "Mark's niece always looks so put together. Maybe you could try styling your hair like hers?" Then it was my grades. I was struggling to keep up at Westfield. It was way harder than my old school. "A B-, Camilla?" Mom frowned, looking at my report card. "Mark's niece is top of her class. Maybe you're not applying yourself enough." The game nights became less frequent. More and more often, I'd come home to find a note on the fridge, "Gone out with the Petersons." Leftovers in the fridge. "Don't wait up." I'd heat up my dinner and eat alone in my room, staring at the fancy decor that suddenly felt cold and impersonal. The final straw was the vacation. They'd been promising me this amazing trip to Hawaii for months. I was so excited, counting down the days. Then, 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave, Mark sat me down. "Listen, kiddo," he said, not quite meeting my eyes, "we're going to have to postpone the trip. Just some financial stuff we need to sort out. You understand, right?" I nodded, forcing a smile. But inside, I felt something crack. That night, I lay in my fancy new bed, in my fancy new room, in this house that was supposed to be my home, and I cried. I cried for the life I'd left behind, for the dad who was probably sitting alone in his big empty house, for the little girl who thought she could have it all. The days leading up to the final custody hearing were tense. Mom was all smiles and reassurances, but I could feel the undercurrent of anxiety in the house. It was like walking on eggshells, everyone trying to pretend everything was perfect. I couldn't sleep. The pressure of the upcoming hearing, the growing unease I felt in this house, it all swirled in my head, keeping me awake night after night. It was about a week before the hearing when it happened. I woke up in the middle of the night, my throat dry as sandpaper. Figuring everyone was asleep, I crept downstairs for a glass of water. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Mom and Mark, having what sounded like a heated discussion. I froze, not wanting to interrupt. That's when I heard it. "I'm tired of pretending that I like having her here," Mark's voice, harsh and annoyed. "The kid is constantly draining our resources." My heart stopped. I pressed myself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. I know, Mom replied, her voice low and urgent. "But think about the tax breaks and the alimony. Once we have full custody, we'll have a steady income stream from Jack." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Mom was using me for money? Mark's voice again, skeptical. "I hope it's worth it. I didn't sign up to be a full-time dad to a teenager." "Just a little longer," Mom said, her voice soothing now. "Once she's officially ours, we can start setting some stricter rules. Maybe even send her to boarding school." I didn't wait to hear more. I bolted back upstairs, my need for water forgotten. I dove under my covers, shaking, tears streaming down my face. It had all been a lie. The shopping trips, the fancy school, the family game nights, it was all just a show. They didn't want me. They wanted Dad's money. I barely slept that night, replaying their words over and over in my head. When morning came, I dragged myself downstairs, feeling like a zombie. "Morning, sweetie," Mom chirped, way too cheerful. "Ready for breakfast?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I poked at my cereal, my stomach churning. "Everything okay, Camilla?" Mark asked, peering at me over his newspaper. "You look a little pale." I forced a smile. "Just nervous about a test," I lied. They exchanged a look. "Well, don't stress too much," Mom said, patting my hand. "I'm sure you'll do great." I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table, to tell them I knew everything, to demand how they could do this to me. But I didn't. I just sat there, nodding and smiling, playing the part of the perfect daughter. As soon as breakfast was over, I retreated to my room. I sat on my bed, staring at the fancy decor that now felt like a prison. What was I going to do? The hearing was in a week. If I didn't say anything, I'd be trapped here, with people who saw me as nothing more than a paycheck. The day of the custody hearing arrived like a thunderclap. The courtroom was packed. Mom and Mark sat on one side, both looking confident and put together. On the other side was Dad, with Grandma and Grandpa right behind him. Dad looked tired, resigned, like he'd already accepted defeat. As the lawyers droned on, presenting their arguments, I sat there in silence, my hands clenched so tight my knuckles were white. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me, their expectations pressing down like a physical thing. Finally, the moment came. The judge, a stern-looking woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, turned to me. "Camilla," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle, "you're old enough now that your opinion matters in this decision. Who do you want to live with?" The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. I could feel Mom's triumphant smile, could practically taste her victory. Dad just looked broken. Like he was bracing for the final blow. I stood up, my legs shaking so bad I thought I might fall over. I took a deep breath, and then, "I want to live with my father," I said, my voice trembling but growing stronger with each word. "And I don't want to see my mother anymore." The shock in the room was electric. Mom's smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. Mark's face went pale. Dad looked like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. The judge leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Camilla, that's a very serious statement. Can you tell us why?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "A week ago, I overheard a conversation between my mother and Mark. They said they were only fighting for custody because of the money. The alimony, the tax breaks. They talked about sending me to boarding school once they had custody. They don't really want me." As I spoke, I could see the color draining from Mom's face. Mark couldn't even look at me, his eyes fixed on the floor. "That's not true," Mom burst out, her voice shrill. "Camilla, honey, you must have misunderstood." "Mrs. Parker, please," the judge cut her off sharply. She turned back to me, her eyes kind but probing. "Camilla, are you absolutely sure about what you heard?" I nodded, feeling tears start to well up in my eyes. "Yes, Your Honor, I'm sure." The judge nodded slowly, then turned to address the courtroom. "In light of this new information, we'll need to take a brief recess. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. As everyone started to file out, I finally dared to look at Dad. He was staring at me, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and something else. Hope, maybe? I wanted to run to him, to throw my arms around him and beg for forgiveness. But before I could move, a court officer was ushering me out of the room. The next 30 minutes felt like an eternity, but finally, we were called back into the courtroom. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The judge cleared her throat, and the room fell silent. In light of the new information provided by Camilla, and after careful consideration of all factors involved, I've reached a decision. Custody is awarded to the father, Jack Thompson. Furthermore, Lisa Parker will be required to pay child support. The relief that flooded through me was overwhelming. I looked at Dad, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw him smile, really smile. As we left the courthouse, Mom grabbed my arm. Her face was twisted with anger and hurt. "I never loved you anyway," she hissed. "You're just as stupid as your father." Her words stung, but as I watched her storm off with Mark, I realized something: I was free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, the constant feeling of not being good enough. The next few years were, well, they weren't easy, but they were healing. Dad and I started going to family therapy together. At first, it was awkward and painful, dredging up all the hurt and misunderstandings between us. But slowly, session by session, we started to rebuild our relationship. We learned to communicate, to understand each other. Our bond grew stronger than I ever thought possible. Grandma and Grandpa became my rocks. They were always there with a warm hug, a home-cooked meal, or just a listening ear when I needed to talk. Their unwavering support helped me believe in family again. I threw myself into school and extracurriculars. I joined the debate team on a whim and discovered I had a knack for public speaking. Standing at the podium, articulating my thoughts, I felt powerful in a way I never had before. It was like I'd finally found my voice. On my 18th birthday, Dad surprised me with a gift that brought me to tears. It was a scrapbook, filled with photos and mementos from my childhood. There were pictures I thought were lost in the divorce: Mom and Dad and me at the beach, my first day of kindergarten, Christmases, and birthdays, and ordinary days that suddenly seemed precious. Now, at 20, I'm in college studying psychology. My experiences inspired me to want to help other kids going through divorce. I want them to know they're not alone, that it's not their fault, that they can survive and even thrive. I still have scars from what happened. There are days when the pain of Mom's betrayal feels fresh, when I wonder how she could have used me like that. But I'm learning to use that pain as fuel, to turn it into something positive. I've started speaking at conferences about children's rights in divorce proceedings. I tell my story, hoping it will make a difference. Maybe if one judge, one lawyer, one parent hears it and thinks twice about using a child as a pawn, it will all be worth it. Dad comes to every one of my speaking engagements. He sits in the front row, beaming with pride. Sometimes I catch him wiping away a tear when I talk about how far we've come. As for Mom, I haven't spoken to her since that day at the courthouse. Sometimes I think about reaching out, but I'm not ready. Maybe someday, but not yet. For now, I'm focused on healing, on building a future, on becoming the person I want to be. Life isn't perfect. I still have trust issues, still struggle with self-doubt sometimes. But I'm learning, growing, healing. And I'm surrounded by people who love me for who I am, not what I can do for them. My name's Sarah, and I've got a story to tell you. It all started when I was just a little kid, maybe 5 or 6. That's when my parents split up. Dad, his name's Mark, he couldn't take it anymore. Mom, Linda, she'd been riding his ass for years about not making enough money. Always putting him down, making him feel like shit. I remember this one time, Dad came home excited about a promotion at work. He was grinning from ear to ear, proud of himself for once. Mom just looked at him and said, "That's it? I thought you'd finally gotten a real job." The light just went out of his eyes. It was like watching someone deflate. So yeah, Dad left. Can't say I blame him now, looking back. But at the time, it felt like my whole world was falling apart. Mom, though? She saw an opportunity. Mom figured out pretty quick that being a poor, abandoned single mother could get her a lot of perks. At work, she'd lay it on thick with her boss. "I'm so sorry I'm late again, Mr. Johnson," she'd sniffle. Sarah was sick, and with no one to help. Mr. Johnson would pat her hand and tell her not to worry. Meanwhile, I was perfectly fine, spending the morning watching cartoons while Mom did her hair and makeup. Family gatherings were the worst. Mom would hold court, dramatically recounting how Dad had left us with nothing. I'd squirm in my seat, uncomfortable with the lie, but not daring to speak up. Even at that age, I knew better than to contradict Mom in public. What no one knew was that Dad was sending money every month. Child support, he called it. Mom would scoff when the checks came in. "Look at this, Sarah," she'd say, waving the paper in my face. "Your father thinks this pittance is enough to raise a child on." Pathetic. I didn't know how much it was supposed to be. All I knew was that it made Mom angry, and when Mom was angry, life got harder for me. As the years went by, I started noticing things. Like how Mom would look at me sometimes, her eyes narrowing like she was seeing something she didn't like. Later, I realized it was because I looked too much like Dad. It brought back memories for her, and not the good kind. But she kept me around. I was useful, you see. The picture of the struggling single mom and her brave little girl was too good to pass up. It got her sympathy, special treatment, even some government assistance. Then, when I was about 10, everything changed again. Mom met Richard. Rich, successful Richard. Suddenly, being a struggling single mom wasn't so appealing anymore. No, now she had a new image to cultivate. The devoted wife of a prominent businessman. And I didn't fit into that picture so well. It started small at first. Mom would forget to wash my clothes, leaving me with nothing clean to wear to school. I'd show up in wrinkled, stained outfits, my face burning with shame as the other kids whispered and pointed. Then came the food situation. Mom would cook these elaborate meals for her and Richard, filling the house with mouth-watering smells. But when I'd come to the table, she'd frown. "Oh, Sarah, I'm sorry. I didn't make enough for 3. Why don't you make yourself a sandwich?" I'd retreat to the kitchen, my stomach growling as I slapped together a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Through the door, I could hear Mom and Richard laughing, the clink of wine glasses a stark contrast to my meager meal. The worst was when she started messing with my schoolwork. I'd spend hours on an assignment, only to have it disappear the next morning. I'd show up to class empty-handed, stammering excuses to my teacher. My grades started to slip, and the teachers began giving me concerned looks. Through it all, Richard remained oblivious. He was always buried in his work, and when he wasn't, his attention was solely on Mom. She'd simper and coo at him, playing the part of the adoring wife. "Richard, darling, you work so hard," she'd say, massaging his shoulders. "You deserve to relax." He'd smile up at her, completely under her spell. "What would I do without you, Linda?" Things got even worse when Mom announced she was pregnant. Richard was over the moon, and Mom milked it for all it was worth. "The doctor says I need plenty of rest," she'd tell me, lounging on the couch. "Be a dear and tidy up the house, won't you?" I'd spend my afternoons cleaning while Mom napped or chatted with her friends on the phone. When Richard came home, she'd struggle to her feet, one hand on her barely there bump. "Oh, honey, I'm so tired," she'd sigh. Growing a baby is hard work. Richard would rush to her side, all concern. "Sit down, my love. Sarah, bring your mother some water." As the months wore on, I felt more and more isolated. At school, I withdrew from my friends, too embarrassed to invite them over. At home, I was little more than a servant, expected to cater to Mom's every whim. One night, as I lay in bed listening to Mom and Richard cooing over nursery designs, something in me snapped. I couldn't do this anymore. I needed out. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never dared to do before. I called my dad and told him everything. The neglect, the mind games, the constant feeling of being unwanted. Dad listened in silence, only the sound of his breathing telling me he was still there. When I finally ran out of words, there was a long pause. "Pack your bags," he said at last, his voice hard. "I'm coming to get you." The next morning, I woke up early, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. I had already packed my bags the night before, unable to sleep from anticipation. As I dragged my suitcase down the stairs, I heard Mom's voice from the kitchen. "Going somewhere, Sarah?" I froze, expecting a confrontation. But when I turned, I saw Mom leaning against the doorframe, a strange smile on her face. She looked relieved. "I'm going to live with Dad," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. To my shock, Mom's smile widened. "Well, it's about time," she said, her tone almost cheerful. "Richard and I could use the extra space for the baby." Her words hit me like a slap, but before I could respond, I heard a car horn outside. Dad was here. Mom walked me to the door, that unsettling smile still in place. "Have a good life, Sarah," she said, practically shooing me out. As I walked to Dad's car, I glanced back. Mom stood in the doorway, looking frankly joyful as she waved goodbye. It was the happiest I'd seen her in years, and it was because I was leaving. Dad's apartment was small, but it felt more like home than anywhere I'd lived in years. However, we wouldn't be there for long. Over the next few months, I watched in awe as Dad's business took off like a rocket. It seemed like every week brought news of a new contract, a big client, or an expansion. Within a year, we were house hunting in the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. The house we ended up buying was nothing short of spectacular. 3 stories of modern architecture, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a backyard that looked like something out of a magazine. My room was bigger than our entire old apartment. While Dad worked long hours managing his now booming business, I threw myself into making our big house a home. I learned to cook gourmet meals, filling the place with amazing smells. I kept things tidy, managed the household staff, even started a vegetable garden in our spacious backyard. As the months passed, I watched Dad's hard work continue to pay off. His business kept growing, and with it, our lifestyle improved even more. I transferred to the most prestigious private school in the city. On my 16th birthday, Dad surprised me with a car. Not just any car, but a brand new luxury SUV. "Now you can drive yourself to school in style," he said, tossing me the keys. "And maybe run some errands for your old man?" As I settled into my new life, I thought about Mom less and less. She never tried to contact me, and I made no effort to reach out to her or any of my maternal relatives. The wounds were still too raw, the memories too painful. Instead, I focused on my studies. Years passed, and before I knew it, I was graduating college with honors. As I stood on that stage, accepting my diploma, I searched the crowd for Dad's face. He was there, beaming with pride, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. This was what it felt like to be loved, truly and unconditionally. After the ceremony, Dad pulled me aside. "I've got something for you," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. He handed me a small box. Inside was a key. "It's for your new apartment. In the city center. Consider it a graduation gift." Tears welled up in my eyes as I hugged him fiercely. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." It had been a few years since I graduated from college. My career was taking off, I had a beautiful apartment in the city, and life was good. Dad and I had settled into a comfortable routine of weekly dinners and long phone calls. Everything was perfect. Until it wasn't. The news came like a thunderbolt out of a clear sky. Dad was sick. Cancer. Advanced. The doctor's words blurred together in a haze of medical jargon, but the gist was clear: it was bad. From that moment on, my world narrowed to a singular focus: saving Dad. I took a leave of absence from work, moving back into his house to take care of him. Every waking moment was devoted to his care. I researched treatments, consulted specialists, tried alternative therapies. Anything that might give us a fighting chance. The months that followed were a brutal cycle of hope and despair. For every good day, when Dad felt strong enough to sit in the garden or share a meal, there were 3 bad ones filled with pain and nausea from the treatments. One evening, as I was helping him back to bed after a particularly rough day, he turned to me with a serious look. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need you to promise me something." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Promise me you'll live your life. Really live it. Don't let this hold you back." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was going to be fine, but we both knew better. So instead, I squeezed his hand and said, "I promise, Dad." He died 2 weeks later. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, telling him how much I loved him, how grateful I was for everything he'd done for me. The next few days passed in a blur. I felt numb, going through the motions of arranging the funeral. There were so many details to handle: the casket, the flowers, the obituary. It all felt surreal, like I was planning an event for someone else. I was at the funeral home, trying to decide on music for the service, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello? Sarah, it's your mother. I nearly dropped the phone. After all these years of silence, she was calling now? What do you want? I asked, my voice cold. I heard about Mark, she said, her voice softer than I remembered. I'm so sorry, sweetie. I'd like to help. With the funeral arrangements, I mean. I wanted to hang up. To tell her to go to hell. But I was so tired, so overwhelmed. And a tiny part of me, a part one thought I'd buried long ago, yearned for a mother's comfort. Okay, I heard myself say. You can help. As I ended the call, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just opened a door I should have kept firmly shut. But with Dad gone, Mom was the only family I had left. Mom arrived at the funeral home an hour after our call, with my half-brother Thomas in tow. The kid was about 13 now, gangly and awkward. I watched as Mom fussed over him, straightening his tie, smoothing his hair. It was like a knife to the gut, seeing her shower Thomas with the affection I'd been denied my entire childhood. What do you need me to do? She asked. Despite my reservations, I put her to work. To my surprise, Mom turned out to be surprisingly helpful, managing the catering, arranging the flowers, dealing with the endless parade of well-wishers. The funeral itself was a blur. I remember standing there, numb, as people I barely knew came up to offer condolences. Linda stayed close, her hand occasionally touching my arm in what I suppose was meant to be a comforting gesture. It felt strange, this sudden maternal presence after years of neglect. After the service, as people were filing out of the cemetery, Linda approached me again. Sarah, I know this might not be the best time, but I'd like to stay in touch. Maybe we could get coffee sometime? I stared at her, this woman who had made my childhood a living hell, who had been thrilled to see me leave. But she was also the only family I had left. Maybe, I said finally. I'll think about it. To my surprise, Linda kept her word. In the weeks that followed, she called regularly, her voice always tinged with concern. How are you holding up, sweetie? She'd ask. Is there anything you need? At first, I was guarded, giving short, non-committal answers. But as the days wore on and the reality of Dad's absence set in, I found myself craving any kind of connection. Even if it was with Linda. Our conversation started simple enough. She'd ask about my job, my apartment, my friends. But gradually, her questions began to shift. Your father's business, she'd say casually. I hope it's not causing you too much stress. Mark always worked so hard. I'd deflect, changing the subject. The truth was, I was still trying to wrap my head around everything Dad had left me. The company, the real estate portfolio, it was overwhelming. And something in me, some instinct honed by years of Linda's manipulations, told me to keep quiet about it. As weeks turned into months, Linda's hints became less subtle. Thomas is looking at colleges, she mentioned during one call. The tuition these days, it's just astronomical. I don't know how we're going to manage it. I made a non-committal noise, my guard instantly up. Another time, it was, Richard's had some setbacks at work. The economy, you know. It's hitting everyone hard. Each conversation seemed to circle back to money, to the struggles they were facing. And each time, I could feel the unspoken expectation hanging in the air. Despite my initial reservations, Linda's persistent displays of maternal affection began to wear down my defenses. Against my better judgment, I started providing small amounts of financial assistance. It started innocently enough, Helping Thomas with his SAT prep courses, buying Linda a new laptop when hers broke down, even covering a month's rent when Richard's company went through a rough patch. "You're an angel, Sarah," Linda would gush. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Each time, I felt a warmth in my chest. Was this what it felt like to have a real family? Meanwhile, I threw myself into running Dad's company. I made his longtime deputy the director, staying on as the owner and reserving the right to make all important decisions. It was challenging work, but I felt closer to Dad every time I sat in his old office. As the months passed, Linda's requests grew more frequent and more substantial. What started as occasional help turned into regular expectations. The breaking point came on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. I was knee-deep in quarterly reports when Linda called. "Sarah, darling," she began, her voice dripping with sweetness. "We'd been thinking. It's been so long since we had a proper family vacation. We found this amazing package deal for a European tour." I felt my stomach drop. "Linda, I don't know." "It would mean so much to Thomas," she interrupted. "And after all we've been through, don't you think we deserve a little happiness?" Guilt warred with resentment in my chest. Before I knew it, I'd agreed to fund their trip. But it didn't stop there. The day after they returned, Linda was on the phone again. "Now, about Thomas's college fund," she said, her tone no longer sweet but demanding. "We'll need you to set that up right away. He's got his heart set on Princeton, you know." Something in me snapped. All the years of neglect, the emotional abuse, the manipulation, it all came rushing back. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "No more, Mom. I'm done." There was a pause, then Linda's voice came back, cold and hard. "After everything we've done for you? You ungrateful little scum. How dare you turn your back on your family?" I laughed, a bitter sound. "Family? You mean the mother who was thrilled to see me leave? The one who made my childhood a living hell?" The argument escalated quickly. Linda dropped all pretense of affection, hurling accusations and insults. I gave as good as I got, years of pent-up anger and hurt pouring out. "You're just like your father," she spat. "Selfish and cold-hearted." "Thank God for that," I shot back. "At least he loved me." The line went dead. I stood there, shaking, my phone clutched in my hand. The silence that followed was deafening. When the opportunity for a month-long business trip abroad came up, I jumped at it. A chance to get away, to clear my head. As I boarded the plane, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. Maybe this was what I needed, some time and distance to figure things out. After a month away, I was looking forward to the comfort of my own bed. The business trip had been successful but exhausting, and all I wanted was to kick off my shoes and relax in my apartment. But as I turned the key in the lock, something felt off. The door swung open to reveal a completely different apartment. Gone were my carefully chosen furnishings, replaced by unfamiliar decor. A startled couple stared at me from the couch. "Who are you?" I demanded, my heart racing. "What are you doing in my apartment?" The man stood up, looking confused. "Your apartment? We bought this place a couple of weeks ago. From a woman named Linda, I think?" The world tilted on its axis. "Linda. My mother. No, it couldn't be." "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice shaking. "I never sold this apartment. I've been out of the country." The couple exchanged worried glances. "We have all the paperwork," the woman said hesitantly. "Maybe you should talk to your realtor?" I stumbled out of the apartment, my mind reeling. My first instinct was to call the police, report a fraud. But a nagging voice in my head told me to confront Mom first. I needed to hear it from her. With trembling fingers, I dialed her number. It rang once, twice. "Hello, Sarah," Mom's voice was sickeningly sweet. "How was your trip?" "Cut the crap, Mom," I snarled. "What did you do to my apartment?" There was a pause, then to my shock, Linda laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "If you had just shared your wealth willingly, it wouldn't have come to this. You brought this on yourself, you know." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. You sold my apartment? How could you?" "I'll go to the police, You'll what?" Linda interrupted, her tone suddenly sharp. "Report your own mother to the authorities? Please. We both know you don't have the spine for that." The call ended, leaving me standing on the sidewalk, homeless and in shock. But Linda's smug certainty had ignited a fire in me. Without thinking, I hailed a cab and gave the driver Linda and Richard's address. I pounded on the door, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Richard answered, his face a mask of confusion. "Sarah, what's going on?" I pushed past him into the house. "Where's Linda?" I demanded. "She's out," Richard said, still looking bewildered. "Sarah, what's this about?" In a rush, I told him everything, the apartment, Linda's confession, all of it. As I spoke, I watched the color drain from Richard's face. "But, that's impossible," he stammered. "We don't need money for Thomas's education. I've already set aside funds for that." We stared at each other, the truth dawning on us both. With shaking hands, Richard began pulling out financial statements, credit card bills. As we pored over them, a horrifying picture emerged. Mom secretly took out loans, and now she is mired in debt. "I had no idea," Richard whispered, looking shell-shocked. "All this time." I felt a strange mix of vindication and pity. Richard had been just as deceived as I had been. As the full extent of Linda's deception became clear, I felt a cold resolve settle over me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was fraud, plain and simple. I didn't hesitate. The moment I hung up with the 911 operator, a weight lifted off my shoulders. For too long, I'd been Mom's victim. Not anymore. The investigation that followed was brutal but necessary. Every rock overturned revealed more of Linda's deceptions. She hadn't just forged my signature to sell my apartment, she'd been living a complete double life. Credit card statements revealed extravagant purchases, designer clothes, luxury spa treatments, 5-star hotels. All hidden from Richard, all financed through a web of lies and secret loans. The trial became a media circus. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, hungry for every sordid detail. I hated the attention, but part of me savored seeing Linda's carefully crafted image crumble in the public eye. In the end, justice prevailed. Mom was found guilty on all counts, fraud, forgery, the works. The judge's words still ring in my ears. "Mrs. Linda Harrison, your actions show a blatant disregard for the law and a shocking betrayal of your family's trust. I sentence you to 3 years in prison, with an order to repay the full value of the fraudulently sold apartment to Sarah Harrison." Richard, bless him, was shell-shocked throughout the whole ordeal. The day after the sentencing, he called me. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm filing for divorce. And I'm seeking full custody of Thomas. After what she's done, I can't let her near him." In the aftermath, I found myself rebuilding my life once again. The apartment money was returned, and I bought a small house on the outskirts of the city. A fresh start. I threw myself into running Dad's company, honoring his legacy the best way I knew how. The work was challenging, but rewarding. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly standing on my own 2 feet. Thomas and I keep in touch. He's in college now, studying engineering with Richard's support. It's bittersweet, but I'm glad we have a chance at some kind of relationship. As for Linda, I haven't heard from her since the trial. I don't know if she's tried to reach out, and honestly, I don't want to know. That chapter of my life is closed. My name's Monica, and I don't remember a time when my parents weren't fighting. Their screaming matches are some of my earliest memories, filling our house with tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. I was just a kid, but even then, I knew something was seriously wrong. I was 4 when everything came to a head. Mom and Dad's arguments had gotten worse, if that was even possible. One night, I woke up to the sound of shattering glass and my mom yelling, "That's it, Mark, I've had enough." The next morning, Dad was gone. Just like that, my family was torn in two. It didn't take long for Dad to move on. Within months, he'd remarried some woman named Caroline and moved across town. From then on, our relationship became a joke. He'd call on holidays, his voice distant and awkward like he was talking to a stranger, not his own kid. The rest of the year, the only sign I had of father was the monthly alimony check he sent to Mom. Mom, for her part, was a mess. Linda Thompson, once the picture of a happy housewife, now a single mother, struggling to keep it together. She threw herself into her work as a real estate agent, but it was obvious she was floundering. I was 7 when Mom started getting weird. She'd always been a bit impulsive, but this was different. One day, she came home with a bunch of books and DVDs about day trading. "This is it, Monica," she said, her eyes shining with a manic gleam that scared me a little. "We're going to be rich." For weeks, she was glued to her computer, muttering about stocks and trades. She'd forget to pick me up from school, or to make dinner. When I'd ask her to play with me, she'd wave me off. "Not now, sweetie. Mommy's working on our future." But our future wasn't looking too bright. I learned to fend for myself pretty quick. By 8, I could make my own meals, even if it was just a peanut butter sandwich, do my own laundry, and get myself ready for school. Mom was too caught up in her get-rich-quick schemes to notice. Things came to a head when I was 9. Mom burst into my room one day, her eyes wild with excitement. "I'm going on a trip to Bali. I've found someone who can help us, sweetie. He's going to show me how to unlock my luck chakra. This is going to change everything." I didn't know what a luck chakra was, but I knew it sounded like trouble. And just like that, I was shipped off to Aunt Rachel's, my mom's friend, while Mom chased her latest crazy scheme halfway across the world. For 6 long weeks, I lived with Aunt Rachel while Mom was off on her spiritual journey in Bali. Don't get me wrong, Rachel was great. She really tried to make things normal for me. "Come on, Monica," she'd say with forced cheerfulness every morning. "Time for summer camp." I'd drag myself out of bed, pretending to be excited about another day of crafts and organized fun while my mind was miles away, wondering what the hell Mom was doing on the other side of the world. Weekends with Rachel were better. We'd go to the zoo or the beach, and for a few hours, I could almost forget the mess my life had become. But then I'd catch her looking at me with pity in her eyes, and reality would come crashing back. When Mom finally came back, it was like she was a whole new person. Her eyes were bright, her smile wide, and she couldn't stop talking about positive thinking and manifesting wealth. "Monica, sweetie, our lives are about to change," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of incense and something else I couldn't quite place. "I've unlocked my true potential. You'll see." It started small. A lottery ticket here, a scratch card there. Mom would come home giddy with excitement over a $20 win, treating me to pizza and new clothes like we were millionaires. "See, Monica? The universe is rewarding us," she'd say, waving the ticket in the air like it was made of gold. I should have known it was too good to be true. Soon, the small bets weren't enough. That's when the casino trip started. The first time she went, she came home at dawn, reeking of cigarettes and cheap perfume, but grinning from ear to ear. "I won $500, she exclaimed, throwing a wad of cash on the kitchen table. "This is just the beginning, honey. Soon, we'll be living in a mansion." I forced a smile, but my stomach was in knots. Something told me this wasn't going to end well. As the weeks went by, Mom's trips to the casino became more frequent. Sometimes she'd win, coming home in a whirlwind of manic energy, talking a mile a minute about her system and how she'd cracked the code. But more often, she'd slink in quietly, her eyes red and puffy, smelling of booze and defeat. The good days were getting rarer, and the bad days, well, they were getting a lot worse. One weekend, Mom disappeared for 2 whole days. She left me with a stack of frozen dinners and a stern warning. "Remember, Monica, this is our little secret," she said, her eyes hard. "If anyone asks, I'm not feeling well and I'm resting in my room. Got it?" When she finally came home Sunday night, she looked like hell. Her clothes were rumpled, her hair a mess, and she couldn't even look me in the eye. "Mommy just had a bit of bad luck. But don't worry, it'll turn around soon. I can feel it." But it didn't turn around. The trips got longer, the losses bigger. I started dreading the sound of her key in the lock in the early hours of the morning. A quiet entry meant a good night at the tables. A slam meant losses, and those were happening more and more often. Grandma Elizabeth was like a breath of fresh air in the suffocating mess my life had become. She lived in the next state over, but she made a point of visiting every few months. Those visits became my lifeline, a glimpse of normalcy in the chaos. But they were also incredibly stressful. The minute we got word that Grandma was coming, Mom would go into full-on panic mode. "Monica," she'd yell, already pulling out cleaning supplies. "We need to get this place in shape. Your grandmother can't see it like this." And so began the frenzied cleaning sprees. We'd spend days scrubbing, dusting, and hiding evidence of Mom's hobby. Dirty dishes that had been piling up for weeks suddenly vanished. The overflowing ashtrays were emptied, and the lingering smell of stale smoke was masked with air freshener. But the worst part wasn't the cleaning, but the lying. "Now remember," Mom would coach me, her eyes hard and serious, "everything's great. I'm doing well at work, and we're very happy. Got it?" When Grandma Elizabeth would finally arrive, I'd plaster on a fake smile and pretend everything was just peachy. But inside, I was screaming. I wanted so badly to tell her the truth, to beg her to take me away from all this. But I couldn't. I couldn't betray Mom like that. Grandma Elizabeth didn't know that the money she kept sending us, money meant for my care and education, was going straight into the casinos. Mom would cash the checks and be out the door before the ink was dry, chasing that elusive big win that would solve all our problems. As I got older, it became harder to ignore the reality of our situation. There were days when the fridge stood empty, and I'd have to ration my school lunches to make them last through dinner. On my 12th birthday, Grandma Elizabeth made a gesture that would change everything. She came to visit, bringing with her a shiny new smartphone, the kind all the cool kids at school had. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said, handing me the gift-wrapped box. "Linda, I've got something for you too. I've opened a college fund for Monica. It's in your name since she's still a minor, but it's for her future. Just promise me you'll use it wisely." Mom nodded, tears in her eyes. "I swear, Elizabeth. I'll never touch that money for anything else. Monica's future means everything to me." As I hugged my grandmother goodbye later that day, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the turning point. Maybe now, with my future secure, Mom would finally get the help she needed. At first everything was fine. Mom started going to Gamblers Anonymous meetings, picked up some real estate clients again. I threw myself into my studies, daring to dream about college and a future free from the chaos of the past few years. But like all the times before, Mom's resolve didn't last. Within months, she was back to her old habits. The excuses started small. "I'm just too tired for the meeting tonight, honey. I'll go next week." But next week never came. Soon, she was disappearing for days at a time again, leaving me to fend for myself. I was 13 now, and I'd become scarily good at being the adult in our household. I could forge Mom's signature perfectly on school documents, a skill born from necessity rather than rebellion. I even taught myself to cook, whipping up simple meals from whatever I could scrounge up in our perpetually bare pantry. Anything to keep my stomach from growling during class. As I entered high school, I withdrew more and more. Making friends felt impossible. How could I invite anyone over when I never knew what state the house, or Mom, would be in? The few times I tried to open up, I was met with blank stares or awkward silence. No one could understand what my life was really like. By 16, I was desperate for some control over my life. That's when I decided to get a job. The local coffee shop was hiring, and to my surprise, the manager hired me on the spot. That coffee shop became my sanctuary. For a few hours each day, I could pretend to be normal. Just another teen working her first job, not the daughter of a gambling addict, barely keeping her head above water. And the money, well, it wasn't much, but it was mine. But reality has a way of shattering even the most carefully constructed illusions. One night, after a late shift at the coffee shop, I came home to find the front door unlocked. Alarm bells went off in my head immediately. Mom might be irresponsible, but she always locked the door. The house was a disaster. Clothes strewn everywhere, dishes piled in the sink, and a smell I couldn't quite place hanging in the air. Then I heard it, muffled sobs coming from the living room. I found Mom sprawled on the floor, an empty wine bottle clutched to her chest like a lifeline. She was on the phone, her words slurred and barely coherent. "I've lost everything," she was saying, her voice breaking. "Just one more chance. I know I can turn it around with one big win." My blood ran cold. I knew, with a certainty that made me sick to my stomach, what she was talking about. I waited until Mom passed out, snoring on the living room floor, before I made my move. With shaking hands, I opened her laptop. It took me a few tries to find the right banking app and guess the password. But when I did, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. The account was empty. Completely drained. Years of saving, Grandma's generous gift, my entire future, gone. I stormed into the living room where Mom was still passed out. I shook her awake, my hands trembling with rage. "Mom, wake up. We need to talk about the money." She blinked at me, confusion and pain etched across her face. "What? Monica, what are you talking about?" "The college fund, Mom. The one Grandma set up for me. The one you swore you'd never touch. It's gone." For a moment, she just stared at me. Then she tried to deny it, her voice weak and unconvincing. No, you must be mistaken. I would never." But as I laid out the evidence, the empty account, the late-night phone call I'd overheard, her denials crumbled. In their place came the accusations. "You ungrateful brat," she screamed, her face contorted with rage and shame. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? Snooping through my private information?" It was like a dam had burst. Years of resentment, fear, and disappointment came pouring out of both of us. We screamed and cried, hurling bitter words at each other like weapons. And then it happened. In a moment of blind fury, Mom's hand lashed out, catching me across the face. The force of the blow knocked me back, and I felt a sharp sting where her ring had cut my cheek. I raised a hand to my throbbing cheek, feeling the warm trickle of blood. Without a word, I turned and fled to my room, locking the door behind me. I slid down to the floor, my back against the door, and finally let the tears come. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here anymore. I packed a backpack with some clothes and the little money I'd saved from my coffee shop job. As the first light of dawn crept through my window, I slipped out of the house without a backwards glance. When I showed up on Dad's doorstep, his reaction was lukewarm at best. He invited me in awkwardly, shooting apologetic glances at Caroline, his wife, who didn't even try to hide her annoyance at my presence. I poured out the whole story: Mom's gambling, the empty college fund, the fight. I watched Dad's face change from shock to anger and finally to a resigned weariness that made my heart sink. I spent that night in their guest room, feeling like an intruder in what should have been my second home. As I lay there, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, I realized I'd been foolish to hope for rescue. My suspicions were confirmed the next evening when I overheard Dad on the phone with Mom. "You need to come get her, Linda," he hissed, his voice low but clear through the thin walls. "This isn't my problem. I've been paying child support for years, that should have been more than enough to cover her education." I crept back to the guest room, my heart heavy with the final death of a hope I hadn't even realized I'd been clinging to. As I sat on the edge of the bed, I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't stay here. The next morning, I sat on the bus, my backpack clutched to my chest, watching the miles tick by. I was headed to Grandma Elizabeth's house in the next state over. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had left. My stomach churned with anxiety. What if Grandma turned me away too? What if Mom had already gotten to her with lies and excuses? I'd been let down so many times before, I wasn't sure I could handle another rejection. When I finally arrived at Grandma Elizabeth's house, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I stood on her porch for what felt like hours, trying to work up the courage to knock. But I needn't have worried. The moment Grandma opened the door and saw me standing there, her face went from shocked to concerned to fiercely protective in the span of seconds. "Monica, sweetheart, what are you doing here? Are you all right?" Before I knew it, I was wrapped in her arms, sobbing out the whole miserable story. The gambling, the lies, the empty college fund, the fight with Mom, Dad's rejection, all of it came pouring out in a flood of tears and broken words. Grandma listened to it all, her face growing stormier with each revelation. When I finally finished, she cupped my face in her hands, her eyes blazing with determination. "You're safe now, honey," she said, her voice firm and reassuring. "We're going to fix this. Together." Grandma Elizabeth wasted no time. She called her friend who was a lawyer, discussing terms like paternal rights and gambling that made my head spin. But mostly, she was preparing for the confrontation I knew was coming. When Mom finally arrived, summoned by Grandma's demands, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked small and defeated, nothing like the towering figure of my childhood. But the moment she opened her mouth, I realized some things hadn't changed at all. "Elizabeth, thank goodness you called," Mom said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I've been so worried about Monica. She's been acting out, telling wild stories. I just don't know what to do with her anymore. I've tried my best, but she's been so difficult, so ungrateful." But Grandma Elizabeth wasn't buying it. Without a word, she opened her laptop and pulled up the bank statements showing the now empty college fund. "Would you care to explain this, Linda?" Grandma asked, her voice ice cold. The color drained from Mom's face as she stared at the screen. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. It was like watching a balloon deflate. "I can explain," she finally stammered. "Things have been tough, and I just needed to borrow a little. I was going to pay it back." But her excuses were weak, and she knew it. I could see the panic in her eyes as she realized she wasn't going to be able to lie her way out of this one. And then, in a last desperate attempt to regain control, Mom's face hardened. "You know what? I don't have to explain myself to you. I'm Monica's mother. That money was in my name. I had every right to spend it how I saw fit." Grandma Elizabeth's eyes flashed with a fierce determination I'd never seen before. She leaned forward, her voice low and dangerous. "You're right about one thing, Linda. There's no legal document stating that money was exclusively for Monica's education. It was a trust placed in you, which you betrayed. But let me be clear about what I can do." Mom's smug expression faltered as Grandma continued. "That house you've been living in? The one you've neglected for years? I bought that as an investment property. And I'm selling it. Immediately." Mom's face went pale. "You can't do that. Where will we live?" "We?" Grandma raised an eyebrow. "There is no we, Linda. The proceeds from the sale will go towards Monica's education and setting her up with a small apartment near her chosen college." I felt a surge of hope, quickly followed by fear as I saw Mom's face contort with rage. But Grandma wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'm suing for custody of Monica. Your gambling addiction, financial abuse, and that little physical altercation you had? All grounds for termination of parental rights." The room fell silent. I held my breath, watching Mom's face as the reality of her situation sank in. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. What followed was a whirlwind of legal activity. Mom, faced with losing everything, fought back hard at first. She hired this slick lawyer who tried to paint me as some troubled teen and Grandma as a meddling old woman. But the evidence against Mom was overwhelming. My teachers came forward, talking about how my grades had slipped, how I'd sometimes come to school looking exhausted or hungry. My manager from the coffee shop testified about my work ethic, how I'd sometimes beg for extra shifts even when I was dead on my feet. With each testimony, I watched Mom shrink a little more in her seat. But the final blow came from an unexpected source. Mom's sponsor from Gamblers Anonymous broke the code of anonymity to testify. She stood up in court and laid it all out: Mom's severe addiction, her repeated relapses, her refusal to truly engage with the program. That was the moment Mom finally broke. As the sponsor spoke, I saw something crumble in Mom's eyes. When she took the stand, gone was the defiant, lying woman I'd known for years. In her place was someone small, broken, and finally, honest. "I have a problem," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've hurt my daughter. I've betrayed her trust. I've ruined everything." As I watched my mother break down on the stand, confessing to years of addiction and neglect, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was relieved to finally hear her admit the truth. Part of me was angry that it had taken this long, that it had to come to this. And part of me, a part one wasn't proud of, felt a grim satisfaction seeing her finally face the consequences of her actions. But mostly, I felt tired. So incredibly, bone-deep tired. As Mom's sobs echoed through the courtroom, I closed my eyes, hoping that somehow, some way, this nightmare was finally coming to an end. The judge's gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the courtroom. In the matter of custody for Monica Thompson, the court rules in favor of Elizabeth Thompson. Linda Thompson's parental rights are hereby terminated. Dad was given a chance to step up, to fight for custody, but he didn't even show up to the hearing. His lawyer simply stated that Mark Thompson would not be contesting Elizabeth's guardianship. Just like that, both my parents had washed their hands of me. True to her word, Grandma Elizabeth sold Mom's house. She combined the proceeds with her own savings to set up a new trust fund for my education. This time it was ironclad: the money could only be used for tuition, books, and other school-related expenses. No one, not even Elizabeth herself, could touch it for anything else. As my high school graduation approached, Grandma and I spent our weekends getting ready for my next big step. She'd bought me a small apartment near the college I'd chosen, and we had fun picking out furniture and decorating it. As we worked, we talked about my plans for the future. I'd decided to major in social work, with a minor in psychology. After everything I'd been through, I wanted to help other kids who were struggling. But even as I settled into my new life, I couldn't shake the conflicting emotions that churned inside me. I was relieved to finally have stability, to know where my next meal was coming from and not have to worry about keeping the lights on. But I also felt guilty. What would happen to Mom now? And as much as I tried to push it down, I was angry. Angry at Mom for her addiction, at Dad for his indifference, at both of them for failing me so completely. Grandma, perceptive as always, noticed my struggle. "Honey," she said gently one day, "I think it might be good for you to talk to someone. A professional, I mean. Someone who can help you process everything that's happened." It wasn't easy. Dredging up old memories, confronting feelings I'd tried so hard to bury, some days I left my sessions feeling wrung out and raw. But slowly, I started to heal. I learned that it was okay to be angry, to be sad, to grieve for the childhood I never had. I learned that my parents' failures weren't my fault, and that I didn't owe them my forgiveness until I was ready to give it, if ever. As I packed up my things, ready to move into my new apartment and start my college journey, I made a difficult decision. I wasn't going to reach out to Mom or Dad. Not yet, maybe not for a long time. I needed to focus on myself, on building the life I wanted, free from their chaos and disappointment. As we drove towards my new apartment, towards my new life, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, I knew that. There would be tough days, days when the old pain and anger would resurface. But for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt hope. Real, genuine hope for my future. I was Monica Thompson. I was a survivor. And now, finally, I had the chance to become so much more. I never knew how close I came to not existing. Mom told me years later that when she found out she was pregnant with me, she wasn't sure they could afford a kid. Dad wasn't making much, and they were barely scraping by. But then my dad's parents, my grandparents, found out about the pregnancy. Not only were they thrilled, but they went above and beyond. They gave Mom and Dad their house, a nice place in a good neighborhood, close to a great school. They even promised to help out with money. I was born into that house, and for the first few years, life was pretty good. Grandma and Grandpa were always around, picking me up, taking care of me when Mom was working. They'd take me to the park, read me stories, and sneak me treats when Mom wasn't looking. When I started school at 5, they'd pick me up every day. We'd go for ice cream or to the playground. Those were some of the happiest times of my life. But then, everything changed. I remember that night clearly. I was supposed to be asleep, but the yelling woke me up. Mom and Dad were having a huge fight. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but I heard words like betrayal and how could you? Then I heard the front door slam. I peeked out my window and saw Dad stumbling to his car. He was holding a bottle. I later learned it was whiskey. I watched him drive off, tires screeching. That was the last time I saw my dad alive. The next morning, 2 police officers came to our door. Mom collapsed when they told her dad had been in an accident. He'd lost control of the car and driven off the road. He didn't make it. The funeral was a blur. I remember holding Mom's hand, confused about why Dad was in a box and why everyone was crying. Grandma and Grandpa were there, hugging me tightly, their faces streaked with tears. But after the funeral, things changed rapidly. Mom seemed to bounce back quickly, too quickly. Within months, she had a new man in her life. Before I knew it, they were married, and Mom was pregnant again. "You're going to have a little sister, Carol," Mom told me, her eyes shining. "Isn't that exciting?" I nodded, not sure how to feel. Everything was changing so fast, and I missed Dad. I missed Grandma and Grandpa too. They stopped coming around, and I didn't understand why. "Mom, why don't Grandma and Grandpa visit anymore?" I asked one day. Mom's face hardened. "They don't want anything to do with us anymore, Carol. They abandoned us because I've started a new family." Then her face softened. "At least they left us the house and helped with the money for your education. That's something to be thankful for." My little sister arrived a few months after Mom remarried. I remember Mom saying she was born prematurely, but even at my young age, something felt off about that explanation. Still, I was too preoccupied with the sudden changes in my life to question it much. My new stepfather, Frank, worked as a driver. Mom kept her job as a salesperson. We weren't rich by any means, but we always had enough for the essentials. At least, that's what I was told. From the start, it was clear that Frank didn't like me much. He'd glare at me across the dinner table, his jaw clenching whenever I spoke. "Can't you keep that kid quiet?" he'd snap at Mom. "I'm trying to eat in peace here." Mom would rush to placate him. "Carol, honey, why don't you go to your room? I'll bring you your dinner later." As time went on, these moments became more frequent. Frank's temper was short, and everything seemed to set him off, especially me. He'd call me names when Mom wasn't around, his face twisted in disgust. "You're nothing but a freeloader," he'd spit. "A burden. You know that, right?" I'd nod silently, fighting back tears. What else could I do? The contrast between how Frank treated me and my sister was stark. With her, he was all smiles and affection. He'd bounce her on his knee, shower her with gifts, and speak to her in a sickeningly sweet voice that made my stomach turn. "There's my little angel," he'd coo. Daddy's got a surprise for you. Mom, desperate to keep Frank happy, started finding ways to keep me out of sight. She'd usher me to my room whenever Frank came home, locking the door behind me. I'd sit there for hours, listening to the sounds of a happy family on the other side, laughter, conversation, the clink of cutlery on plates. I didn't understand why I had to eat alone in my room, why I couldn't move freely in my own home, why I was treated like an unwelcome guest. As I grew older, the isolation intensified. Family holidays? I wasn't invited. Trips to visit Frank's friends and relatives? I was left behind. Even when people came to our house, I was told to stay in my room and keep quiet. "We don't want to upset Frank," Mom would say, her eyes pleading. "You know how he gets." And I did know. I'd seen his rages, heard the crashes and bangs when something set him off. So I stayed quiet. I stayed out of the way. I became a ghost in my own home. The only times I felt any semblance of normalcy were the rare occasions when Mom would take me shopping or run errands with her. But even then, there was no room for fun or freedom. It was all business, quick and efficient, always with an eye on the clock. "We can't be too long," Mom would say, checking her watch nervously. "Frank will be home soon." As the years passed, I retreated further into myself. I became shy, withdrawn. At school, I barely spoke to anyone. But in the privacy of my room, in the worlds I created in my mind, I found an escape. I'd make up stories, grand adventures where I was the hero, where I was wanted and loved. When I turned 16, my life took an unexpected turn. Spending most of my time alone in my room, I'd become pretty good at using the internet to escape my reality. One day, I stumbled upon an online publishing house that was looking for fresh voices in children's and young adult literature. On a whim, I submitted some of my stories. To my shock, they loved them. Before I knew it, I was working with them regularly, writing stories and helping develop educational apps for kids and teens. For the first time in years, I felt proud of myself. My ideas were popular, my stories were being published, and best of all, I was earning my own money. I saved every penny I could, watching my bank account grow with a sense of excitement I'd never felt before. One day, feeling particularly bold after a big payment came through, I decided to share my success with Mom. We were alone in the kitchen, Frank was out on a long-haul drive, and my sister was at a friend's house. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking a little, "I've got something to tell you. I've been working for this publishing house, writing stories and stuff. And, well, I'm making pretty good money." Mom's eyes widened. "Really? Oh, Carol, that's wonderful. I always knew you were a smart girl." Her praise, so rare these days, made me glow. But then her expression changed, becoming calculating. "You know," she said, leaning in close, "this is perfect timing. We've been having some financial troubles lately." My heart sank. I should have known better than to hope for simple pride or happiness. "The thing is," Mom continued, "this house is so big, and the upkeep is expensive. And well, raising you hasn't been cheap either. We've been exhausted trying to provide for you all these years." I felt like I'd been slapped. Hadn't I been the one locked away, barely even part of the family? How had I been such a burden? "Remember that college fund we set aside for you?" Mom said, not meeting my eyes. "Well, we had to use that money. For the house, you know. But now that you're earning your own money, you can support yourself, right?" I nodded numbly, not trusting myself to speak. "That's my girl," Mom said, patting my hand. "Oh, and one more thing. Frank and I have been talking, and we think it's best if you move out after you graduate. We're planning to renovate your room for your sister. She needs more space, you understand." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Move out? But where will I go?" Mom shrugged, already turning away. "You're a smart girl, Carol. I'm sure you'll figure it out. You've got some savings now, right?" As she walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone, the full weight of her words hit me. I was being kicked out. The money I thought would be my ticket to college was gone. And my own mother didn't seem to care where I ended up. The months leading up to graduation were a blur of anxiety and desperate planning. I threw myself into my schoolwork during the day, determined to at least finish high school strong. At night, I worked tirelessly on my writing projects, trying to save every penny I could. But no matter how I crunched the numbers, it wasn't enough. College tuition, living expenses, books, it all added up to way more than I had or could hope to earn in time. The realization that my dreams of higher education were slipping away hit me hard. I tried to talk to Mom about it once, hoping against hope that she'd have a change of heart. "Mom, I've been looking at college costs, and I don't think I can." She cut me off before I could finish. "Carol, we've been over this. You're on your own now. You'll figure it out." The day of graduation came and went. I should have felt proud, accomplished. Instead, I felt numb. The next morning, Mom appeared in my doorway with a couple of cardboard boxes. "Time to pack up, Carol," she said, her tone eerily cheerful. "Your sister's so excited about her new room." I packed my life into those boxes, fighting back tears. When I was done, Mom helped me carry them to the front door. As I stood on the porch, my meager possessions at my feet, Mom gave me a quick, awkward hug. "Good luck out there," she said, and then the door closed behind her. I stood there for a moment, shell-shocked. Then, taking a deep breath, I picked up my boxes and walked away from the only home I'd ever known. With what little money I had, I managed to rent a tiny studio apartment. It was in a sketchy part of town, and the sound of sirens often kept me up at night, but it was mine. I decided to postpone college for a year. I had no choice, really, and focus on work. I reached out to my contacts at the publishing house, practically begging for more work. To my relief, they were more than happy to oblige. "We've been impressed with your work, Carol," my editor told me. "How would you feel about writing some children's books for us?" I jumped at the opportunity. Soon, I was working around the clock, churning out stories and illustrations. The work was demanding, but I loved it. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was good at something, like I had a purpose. Living alone wasn't easy, but I was used to fending for myself. I learned to budget, to cook simple meals, to navigate the public transit system. I even made a few friends in the building, other young people trying to make it on their own. But despite my best efforts, saving for college remained a distant dream. Every time I thought I was getting ahead, some new expense would crop up. A plumbing emergency in my apartment, a laptop repair, a trip to the doctor when I caught a nasty flu, each setback ate into my savings. It had been a year since I'd left home when my phone rang with a number I never expected to see again. My mother's voice came through, sickly sweet and unfamiliar. "Carol, sweetie, how are you? I've missed you so much. Why don't you come visit us this weekend?" Suspicion immediately flared in my gut, but curiosity got the better of me. I agreed to visit, packing an overnight bag with a mix of anticipation and dread. As soon as I arrived at my old home, my suspicions were confirmed. Mom was overly affectionate, hugging me tightly and peppering me with questions about my life. It felt artificial, like watching a bad actress perform. "Oh, Carol," she cooed, "you must be tired from your trip. Why don't you sleep in your sister's room tonight? She can take the guest room." I nodded, bemused. My sister, now a teenager, rolled her eyes but didn't argue. The next morning, I woke to the sound of familiar voices downstairs. Curious, I made my way to the kitchen, where I froze in the doorway. Sitting at the table were two elderly people I hadn't seen in years, but recognized instantly, my grandparents, my dad's parents. Grandma's eyes lit up when she saw me. "Carol, oh, look how you've grown." I stood there, shocked, as they explained why they were there. "We're moving to a nursing home soon," Grandpa said, his voice gruff with emotion. "But before we go, we wanted to make sure you're doing well. That you're prospering." "Yes," Grandma chimed in, "tell us all about your college. What are you studying, dear?" I opened my mouth, not sure what to say, when Mom jumped in. "Oh, Carol's doing wonderfully at school. Aren't you, honey? Top of her class, just like always." I stared at her, unable to believe the lies flowing so easily from her lips. My grandparents looked pleased, but they still had questions. "That's wonderful," Grandma said. "Could we talk to Carol alone for a bit? We'd love to catch up." A flash of panic crossed Mom's face. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary. Carol's quite busy, aren't you, dear? In fact, we should probably wrap this up soon." She quickly steered the conversation to other topics, barely letting me get a word in. As the visit came to an end, I felt a gentle touch on my arm. Grandma pressed something into my hand, a business card. As soon as my grandparents left, the change in Mom was immediate. Her smile vanished, replaced by a cold, indifferent expression I knew all too well. "Well, that's done," she said, clearing the table briskly. "You should probably head home now, Carol. I'm sure you have things to do." I stood there, the business card burning a hole in my pocket, as Mom all but pushed me out the door. The warmth and affection of moments ago were gone, replaced by the cool detachment I'd grown up with. As soon as I got back to my tiny apartment, I pulled out the business card my grandmother had slipped me. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" My grandmother's voice came through, warm and familiar, despite the years. "Grandma, it's Carol," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We talked for a while, her voice filled with a mixture of joy and concern. Before I knew it, we'd arranged for her and Grandpa to visit me the next day. I gave them my apartment address, feeling a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. As soon as I hung up, I threw myself into a cleaning frenzy. My small studio apartment wasn't much, but I was determined to make it as welcoming as possible. I scrubbed every surface, organized my meager belongings, and even managed to find a vase for some fresh flowers I picked up from the corner store. That night, I barely slept. Instead, I spent hours in the tiny kitchenette, preparing lunch for tomorrow. I even decided to bake Grandma's favorite cookies, snickerdoodles, using a recipe I'd found online. Morning came too quickly. I was just pulling the last batch of cookies from the oven when there was a knock at the door. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed down my shirt and went to answer it. There they stood, Grandma and Grandpa. For a moment, we all just stared at each other, years of separation hanging between us. Then Grandma stepped forward, enveloping me in a tight hug. "Oh, Carol," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Look at you, all grown up." As I ushered them inside, I saw their eyes widen as they took in my small apartment. Confusion flickered across their faces. "Carol," Grandpa said slowly, "why are you living here? Your mother told us you were living in the house." Before I could even begin to explain, they launched into a story that turned my world upside down. "We've always wanted to be part of your life," Grandma said, her eyes brimming with tears. "But your mother, she kept us away." They told me about the night my father died, the real story. My mother had been unfaithful. She was already pregnant with my sister when my father found out. He wanted a divorce, but then the accident happened. I sat there, stunned, as they continued. "The house I grew up in, the one Mom and Frank still lived in, was mine. Left to me in my father's will. We've been sending money for your care every month," Grandma said, reaching for my hand. "After you graduated, we increased the amount, thinking you were in college and needed more." The room seemed to spin. All this time, struggling to make ends meet, and there had been money meant for me? A house in my name? "We wanted to make sure you were living comfortably in the house, that everything was okay," Grandpa added. "That's why we came to visit yesterday." As I sat there, staring at my grandparents in disbelief, the weight of their words slowly sank in. I felt a surge of emotions, anger, betrayal, and a deep, aching sadness for the childhood I never had. "I don't understand," I stammered. "All this time, there was money for me? A house in my name?" Grandma squeezed my hand tightly. "Tell us everything, Carol. We need to know what really happened." And so, I did. I told them about my lonely childhood, confined to my room like a dirty secret. I spoke of Frank's hostility, of always feeling like a burden. I explained how the money for college had been taken away, how I'd been kicked out with nothing but a few boxes of belongings. I'd been working nonstop, I said, my voice cracking. Writing children's books, living in this tiny apartment, trying to save for college. I never knew about any maintenance money. As I spoke, I watched my grandparents' expressions change from shock to fury. Grandpa's face turned red, his hands clenching into fists. "This is unacceptable," he growled. "What your mother has done, it's theft, it's abuse. We're going to make this right, Carol. I promise you that." True to their word, my grandparents sprang into action. They hired a lawyer, one of the best in the city. Over the next few weeks, I watched in awe as they fought tirelessly on my behalf. The court case was brutal. Mom and Frank tried to paint me as a rebellious, ungrateful child who had run away. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements showed years of diverted funds. Neighbors testified about my isolation. In the end, justice prevailed. The judge ruled in our favor, evicting Mom and Frank from the house that was rightfully mine. The back payments of maintenance money were ordered to be paid to me in full. As we left the courthouse, I felt a mix of vindication and sadness. Yes, I had won, but at what cost? The family I had known, dysfunctional as it was gone forever. But I had a new family now. Grandma and Grandpa were determined to make up for lost time. They helped me move into my house, a concept I was still struggling to grasp. They gave me money for tuition and sat with me for hours, helping me choose the right college. I decided on a school close to the nursing home where they were moving. It felt right, being near them after all these years apart. For a while, everything seemed perfect. I visited Grandma and Grandpa often, soaking up their love and wisdom. We'd play cards, watch old movies, and talk for hours. They told me stories about my dad, filling in the blanks of my own history. But life, I was learning, had a cruel way of giving with one hand and taking with the other. Just as I was settling into my new life, reveling in the love of my grandparents, tragedy struck. Grandpa went first. A heart attack, quick and unexpected. Grandma followed barely 2 months later. The doctor said it was natural causes, but I knew the truth, she'd lost her will to live without him. Once again, I found myself alone. The grief was overwhelming. I'd only just found them, only just started to heal the wounds of my past, and now they were gone. I threw myself into my studies, trying to distract myself from the pain. But every empty holiday, every milestone I couldn't share with them, was a fresh wound. Years passed, and life took on a rhythm I never thought possible. I graduated college with honors, landing a job at a prestigious publishing house, the same one that had given me my first break as a teenager. With the inheritance from my grandparents, I bought a cozy apartment close to work, a place that was truly mine. My financial situation had dramatically improved. I rented out my grandparents' house and my childhood home, providing a steady stream of additional income. For the first time in my life, I felt secure, stable, and most importantly, happy. I had friends, a fulfilling career, and a sense of peace I'd never known before. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. One sunny afternoon, my phone rang. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I recognized it instantly, my mother's. With a mix of curiosity and dread, I answered. "Carol?" Her voice was sickly sweet, dripping with false affection. "Sweetie, how are you?" Before I could respond, she launched into a sob story. My sister was pregnant, abandoned by her husband. They were all living together, Mom, Frank, and my sister, crammed into a tiny rented apartment. "We have nowhere to go," Mom whimpered. "I was hoping, well, that house you own, your childhood home. Could we maybe stay there? Just until we get back on our feet." I listened in stunned silence as she alternated between begging and crying, her voice taking on that manipulative tone I remembered all too well from my childhood. "Please, Carol," she pleaded. We're family. We need your help. As she spoke, memories flooded back. The lonely nights locked in my room. The years of neglect and emotional abuse. The day she kicked me out with nothing but a few boxes of belongings. Family? I finally spoke, my voice cold. That's rich coming from you, Mom. Where was this family when you locked me away like a dirty secret? Where was it when you kicked me out with nowhere to go? Carol, that's all in the past. No, I cut her off. It's not in the past. It's right here, right now. You're only reaching out because you need something from me. Just like always. I could almost hear her scrambling, trying to find the right words to manipulate me. But I wasn't that scared, lonely girl anymore. You want my advice, Mom? Solve your own problems. Figure it out on your own. Isn't that what you told me when you threw me out? But Carol. Good luck, I said, echoing her words from years ago. You're going to need it. Without waiting for a response, I hung up. My hand shook as I blocked her number, but I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For years, I'd carried the burden of her rejection, her neglect. But now, I was finally free. I'm Elizabeth, but most people call me Liz or Lizzie. Some even call me Betty, though I've never been fond of that one. I grew up in what you'd call an ordinary family, Mom, Dad, and my older sister, Kate. Kate's 7 years older than me, and boy, did that make a difference. From the day I can remember, our house was like a shrine to Kate's existence. Every wall had a picture of her first smile, her first steps, or her scribbled drawings that Mom and Dad treated like Picassos. Me? I was just there. I got used to it, you know? Wearing Kate's hand-me-downs, playing with her old toys. It wasn't great, but I didn't know any different. I just learned to keep quiet and not make a fuss. As the years went by, the pattern continued. Kate got new clothes, I got her old ones. She got the latest toys, I got the ones she'd outgrown. But I never complained. I just existed. High school came and went. Kate had already moved out by then, off to college on a scholarship. I thought maybe now my parents would notice me more, but nope. It was all about Kate's college adventures, Kate's new boyfriend, Kate's future. Then came the big announcement. Kate burst into the house one Sunday afternoon, all smiles and excitement. Mom, Dad, I'm getting married, she squealed. You'd think she'd just announced she'd cured cancer or something. Mom burst into tears, Dad started whooping and hollering. Me? I just sat there, wondering if anyone remembered I was in the room. Kate turned to me, her eyes shining. And Lizzie, you'll be my bridesmaid, right? I nodded, forcing a smile. Sure, Kate. Congratulations. As they all hugged and cried and laughed, I slipped out of the room. No one noticed. They never did. Kate's wedding turned out to be a bigger deal than anyone expected. One evening, I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones in the kitchen. We'll have to take out a loan, Dad said, his voice strained. Mom sighed. I know, but it's Kate's big day. We can't let her down. I felt a knot form in my stomach. They were going into debt for Kate's wedding? I wanted to say something, to point out how crazy this was, but I knew better. My opinions didn't matter much in this house. The wedding was a lavish affair. Kate looked like a princess, and our parents beamed with pride. I stood there in my bridesmaid dress, feeling invisible as always. After the honeymoon, Kate dropped another bombshell. I've decided to be a housewife, she announced over Sunday dinner. Jack makes enough for both of us. Mom and Dad exchanged glances. I could see the worry in their eyes, but they plastered on smiles. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Mom said. If that's what makes you happy. I wanted to scream. They'd taken out a loan for her wedding, and now she wasn't even going to work. But I kept my mouth shut, pushing my food around my plate. It wasn't long before Kate was pregnant. With twins, no less. Our parents went absolutely nuts. Twins, Dad kept saying, shaking his head in wonder. Can you believe it? I could believe it. I could also believe what came next. We should help them buy a house, Mom suggested one night. They'll need the space with 2 babies on the way. Dad nodded. We could make the down payment on a mortgage. There's that nice place not far from here. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Are you serious? I blurted out. You're already in debt from the wedding, and now you want to buy them a house? They both looked at me like they'd forgotten I was there. Maybe they had. Elizabeth, Mom said, her voice stern. This is what family does. We help each other. The twins were born a few months later. 2 little boys, cute as buttons. Mom and Dad were over the moon, spending every free moment at Kate's new house, cooing over the babies. Meanwhile, I was finishing up high school, trying to figure out my next steps. College was the obvious choice, but how was I going to pay for it? One night, I worked up the courage to ask. Mom, Dad, I've been looking at colleges. That's nice, dear, Mom said, not looking up from the photo album of the twins she was putting together. I was wondering, could you help me with tuition? They exchanged that look again. The one that said they'd rather be talking about anything else. Well, sweetie, Dad started, we'd love to help, but with the loan for Kate's wedding and helping with the house. We can cover half, Mom jumped in. But you'll need to figure out the rest on your own. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Half? That's all they could do? After everything they'd done for Kate? But I knew arguing was pointless. Okay, I said, my voice small. Thanks. As I walked back to my room, I heard them resume their conversation about the twins' latest accomplishments. I closed my door, leaned against it, and for the first time in years, I let myself cry. I'd managed to get into the local community college, not my dream school, but the only one I could afford with my parents' measly contribution. To make up the difference, I landed a part-time job at a nearby diner. Let me tell you, waiting tables while trying to keep up with college coursework is no picnic. I'd drag myself home most nights, dead on my feet, dreaming of my bed. But even that small comfort was often yanked away from me. It started one Friday evening. I'd just finished a brutal shift and was looking forward to face planting into my pillow when I walked in to find Kate in our living room, the twins crawling around her feet. Oh, Lizzie, she exclaimed. Thank God you're here. I'm at my wit's end with these 2. Mind watching them for a bit? Jack and I haven't had a date night in ages. Before I could even open my mouth, she was out the door, leaving me with 2 screaming 3-year-olds. What the hell? I muttered, staring at my nephews. Don't get me wrong, I love the little terrors, but this wasn't what I signed up for. Mom wandered in from the kitchen. Your sister is exhausted. This is what family does. Besides, it'll be good practice for when you have your own kids. I wanted to scream. Kids? I was barely keeping my head above water as it was. This became a regular occurrence. Every weekend, without fail, Kate would show up, drop off the twins, and disappear. Sometimes she'd claim she had errands. Other times, she and Jack would go catch a movie or grab dinner. And every time, I'd end up playing babysitter. One Saturday, after a particularly hellish week of exams, I'd had enough. Kate had just breezed out the door, leaving the twins mid-tantrum. Mom, Dad, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This isn't fair, I'm exhausted, I work, I study, and now I'm expected to give up my weekends too? Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. Lizzie, your sister needs the help. You should be glad to do it. But what about what I need? I protested. I'm running myself ragged here. Mom sighed. Elizabeth, don't be selfish. Kate has 2 children to look after. You don't know how hard that is. I gave up. It was clear they weren't going to listen. So I resigned myself to my fate, classes during the week, work in the evenings, and unpaid babysitting on the weekends. Personal life? Huh. That was a joke. The closest thing I had to a social life was making small talk with customers at the diner. Dates? Forget about it. Between work, study, and the twins, I barely had time to shower, let alone meet someone. I was at my breaking point. The constant juggle of work, school, and forced babysitting had left me drained, both physically and mentally. I needed a break, a real one, away from everything and everyone. So, I made a decision. Mom, Dad, I announced one evening, I'm taking a few days off. Going to the beach. Their reaction surprised me. For once, they actually seemed happy for me. That's wonderful, Lizzie, Mom exclaimed. Where are you going? I told them about the cheap motel I'd found online, right by the ocean. Nothing fancy, but it was all I could afford. Dad nodded approvingly. Good for you, kiddo, you deserve a break. I almost fell over from shock. Was this really happening? Were they actually acknowledging my needs for once? The day finally came. I packed my bag, hopped on a bus, and felt the weight lifting off my shoulders with every mile that passed. When I finally arrived at the coast, I couldn't believe my luck. The motel was small and a bit run down, but the ocean view was spectacular. I dropped my bag in the room and headed straight for the beach. The salty air filled my lungs, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I treated myself to lunch at a cute little seaside cafe, savoring every bite. No screaming kids, no homework, no customers to please. Just me, my thoughts, and the sound of the waves. As the sun started to set, I headed back to the motel, already planning my evening of peaceful solitude. But as I approached my room, I heard familiar voices. Surprise, Lizzie! I froze. There, standing outside the room next to mine, were Mom and Kate, with the twins running circles around their legs. What are you doing here? I stammered, my heart sinking. We couldn't let you be all alone on your vacation, Mom chirped. So we decided to join you. We're right next door. I noticed their suitcases outside one of the nicer rooms. Of course, they'd splurged on themselves while I was in the budget option. Before I could process what was happening, Kate was pushing the twins towards me. The boys have been dying to see the ocean. You don't mind watching them for a bit, do you? I want to take a walk on the beach. And I need to run to the store, Mom added. We'll be back soon. Just like that, they were gone, leaving me standing there with two overexcited 3-year-olds tugging at my hands. What followed was the worst vacation of my life. The twins were out of control, tearing around my small room like tornadoes. They ripped the curtains, broke glasses, and somehow managed to clog the toilet with apples. I had to shell out money I didn't have for repairs and to call a plumber. By the end of the weekend, I was more exhausted than I'd ever been. The final straw came when Kate had the audacity to complain about how tired she was from all the traveling. I lost it. The argument that followed was epic. I yelled, Mom cried, Kate sulked, and the twins screamed through it all. I packed my bags that night and caught the first bus home in the morning. As I watched the coastline disappear behind me, I felt something shift inside. This couldn't go on. Something had to change. I dragged myself through the front door, exhaustion weighing heavily on my shoulders. Dad was in his usual spot, eyes glued to the TV. He barely grunted a hello as I passed. I crashed into bed that night, my mind a whirlwind of emotions and half-formed plans. When morning came, I knew what I had to do. I was halfway through packing my suitcase when I heard the front door slam. Mom's voice rang out, sharp and irritated. Elizabeth, where are you? She appeared in my doorway, face flushed with anger. I can't believe you just left us there. Do you have any idea how difficult it was to manage the twins on our own? I bit back a retort about how I managed the twins on my own all the time. Instead, I just kept packing. Mom's eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. What are you doing? I'm leaving, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm moving out, I need my own life. Their reactions were immediate and predictable. How can you be so selfish? Mom cried. After everything we've done for you. Dad's face turned red. You ungrateful girl. Have you thought about your sister? Who's going to help her with the twins? I felt something snap inside me. My sister? What about me? When has anyone in this family ever thought about what I need? Elizabeth, Mom gasped. No, I'm serious, I pressed on. Kate has a husband. Let him help with the kids. I need to focus on my own life. You listen here, young lady, Dad growled. If you walk out that door, don't expect us to keep paying for your college. You'll be on your own. I looked at them both, these people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally. In that moment, I realized they were strangers to me. Fine, I said, zipping up my suitcase. I'd rather be on my own than live like this. No personal life, no time for myself, just constant demands and screaming kids. I'm done. I pushed past them, dragging my suitcase down the stairs. They followed, still shouting, but I tuned them out. As I reached for the door handle, Mom made one last attempt. If you leave now, don't bother coming back. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Then, without looking back, I opened the door and stepped out into the unknown. The next few weeks were a blur. I crashed on a classmate's couch while scrambling to find a more permanent solution. Eventually, I connected with a girl from my study group who was also looking for a roommate. We found a tiny apartment that we could just barely afford between the two of us. With my parents cutting me off financially, I had to pick up more shifts at the diner. I was working almost full-time on top of my classes. There were nights I thought I wouldn't make it, when the exhaustion was so deep I could barely think straight. But you know what? For the first time in my life, I felt free. No one was making demands on my time. No one was guilting me into babysitting or putting their needs before my own. The apartment was small, my bed was a mattress on the floor, but it was mine. I threw myself into my studies with a determination I didn't know I possessed. Every all-nighter, every missed social event, every extra shift, it was all working towards my goal. My future. Before I knew it, 2 years had passed. As I sat in the auditorium on graduation day, waiting for my name to be called, I scanned the crowd. A small part of me hoped to see a familiar face, Mom, Dad, even Kate. But the seats I'd reserved remained empty. Life after college was like stepping into a whole new world. I landed a job at a marketing firm, and suddenly, I had a steady income that wasn't just scraping by. For the first time in years, I could breathe easy. I rented my own apartment, nothing fancy, but it was all mine. No roommates, no family drama, just peace and quiet. And let me tell you, it was glorious. I started doing all those normal things I'd missed out on before. I went on dates, made new friends, even had a couple of short-lived relationships. Nothing serious, but it was fun to just be young and carefree for once. My parents? They were still in the picture, but barely. We'd talk maybe once a month, stilted conversations full of awkward silences and thinly veiled disapproval. They were still sore about me moving out, and I wasn't exactly rushing to mend fences. Then came my 25th birthday. I had plans with friends, nothing wild, just dinner and drinks. But a week before, I got a call from Mom. Elizabeth, she said, her voice oddly cheerful, we want you to come over for your birthday. The whole family will be there. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When I arrived at my parents' house, it was like stepping back in time. Kate and her husband were there, the twins, now 7 years old, running around like little tornadoes. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins milled about, all smiles and hugs. Happy birthday, Lizzie, they chorused as I walked in. I plastered on a smile, accepting hugs and well wishes. Then came the gifts. Most were typical, clothes, books, gift cards. But then Mom handed me an envelope with a flourish. This is from all of us, she said, beaming. I opened it, my stomach sinking as I saw what was inside. A ticket to a beach resort. We're all going, Dad announced proudly. A big family vacation. We've paid for everything. I froze. A family vacation with the twins? It was my ruined beach trip all over again. I opened my mouth to refuse, but Mom squeezed my arm, whispering harshly, "Don't you dare make a scene. Not in front of everyone." So I smiled and thanked them, all the while screaming internally. The party wound down, relatives trickled out, and finally, it was just us, me, Mom, Dad, Kate, and her family. That's when I let loose. "I'm not going," I said flatly. "What?" Kate gasped. "But it's a family trip." "Exactly," I replied. "And I'm not interested in spending my vacation babysitting your kids again." Kate burst into tears. "You don't love us at all, do you? You don't care about your nephews." "I care about them just fine," I snapped. "But if I wanted kids, I'd have my own." The argument went round and round. Mom called me ungrateful, Dad looked disappointed, Kate kept crying. They all tried to guilt me, to pressure me into giving in. "Fine," I said finally, my voice tired. "I'll go." They all looked relieved, like they'd won some great victory. But they had no idea what was coming. The day of departure arrived, and I found myself at the airport, surrounded by my overly cheerful family. Kate and her husband were practically bouncing with excitement, already making plans for all the alone time they'd have while I watched the twins. "You'll have so much fun with Aunt Lizzie," Kate told the boys, winking at me. "She'll take you to the beach, build sandcastles, maybe even go snorkeling." Mom and Dad were beaming too, going on about how nice it would be for Kate to have a break. Not once did anyone ask what I wanted to do on this vacation. It was clear they all saw me as nothing more than a convenient babysitter. As we approached the check-in counter, I made my move. "Oh," I exclaimed, feigning discomfort. "I need to use the restroom." "You guys go ahead and check in. I'll meet you at the gate." They nodded, distracted by wrangling luggage and excited children. I watched them join the queue, then turned and walked briskly in the opposite direction. My heart was pounding as I approached a different check-in counter. I handed over my passport and the ticket I'd bought weeks ago, a flight to a small, peaceful island resort. Once through security, I found a quiet corner and pulled out my phone. My hand shook slightly as I typed out a message to Mom. "I'm not coming with you, I'm going on my own vacation. Enjoy your trip." I hit send and immediately turned off my phone, not wanting to deal with the fallout just yet. I could almost hear the explosion of anger and disbelief that would be happening at the other check-in counter. As I settled into my seat on the plane, I turned my phone back on briefly. It immediately exploded with notifications, missed calls, voicemails, angry texts. I listened to one voicemail from Mom, her voice shrill and furious. "Elizabeth Morgan. How dare you abandon your family like this? You've ruined everything. Your sister is in tears, her husband is furious, they were counting on you to watch the boys. And I had plans. You are the most selfish, ungrateful." As the plane took off, I sipped my champagne and gazed out the window. The guilt was still there, a small knot in my stomach. I knew I'd have to deal with the fallout eventually. There would be angry phone calls, tearful accusations, probably another round of being called selfish and ungrateful. But overwhelmingly, I felt free. Light. Like I could finally breathe. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I was going on a trip that was just for me. No obligations, no babysitting, no family drama. Just me, the beach, and whatever I decided I wanted to do. As the plane touched down on the small, tropical island, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The warm breeze that greeted me as I stepped off the plane seemed to whisper, "Welcome to freedom." I checked into my resort, a modest but charming place right on the beach. As I unpacked, curiosity got the better of me, and I turned on my phone. Instantly, it exploded with notifications. Hundreds of text messages, missed calls, and voicemails flooded in. With a mix of amusement and trepidation, I scrolled through some of the messages. "How could you do this to us, Mom? You ruined everything, Kate. You're so selfish, Elizabeth, Dad. I couldn't help but smile. For once, I had chosen myself over their demands. I turned the phone off again and tossed it into the hotel safe. For the next week, I was unreachable. And what a week it was. I lounged on the beach, read books uninterrupted, went snorkeling, and even tried my hand at surfing. I chatted with other vacationers, went on a few casual dates, and stayed out as late as I wanted. No schedule, no responsibilities, no screaming kids. Just me and the rhythm of the waves. All too soon, it was time to head home. I returned to my apartment tanned, rested, and more centered than I'd felt in years. But the real world was waiting to intrude on my newfound peace. The very next day, there was a pounding on my door. I opened it to find Mom and Kate, faces red with anger. "How dare you?" Mom screeched, barging in without invitation. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Kate wasn't far behind. "You ruined our entire vacation." The boys were devastated. They launched into a tirade, their voices overlapping as they hurled accusations and insults. I was selfish, ungrateful, a terrible daughter and sister. I owed them for the ticket they'd bought me, for the vacation I'd ruined, for the childcare I'd failed to provide. I let them rant for a few minutes, their words washing over me without sticking. Then, calmly but firmly, I spoke. "That's enough," I said, my voice cutting through their noise. "I don't owe you anything. Not money, not childcare, not my time. I'm an adult, and I get to make my own choices." Mom opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. "I'm not discussing this further. Please leave. When you're ready to treat me with respect and have a calm conversation, we can talk. Until then, I think it's best we don't communicate." They stared at me, shocked into silence. Then, with a few more choice words, they stormed out. As the door slammed behind them, I let out a long breath. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. Over the next few weeks, I made some big changes. I found a new apartment in a different part of town and moved without telling my family my new address. I threw myself into my work and picked up some new hobbies, painting, yoga, even started learning a new language. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, pangs of guilt. But every time I came home to my peaceful apartment, every time I made plans without worrying about babysitting duties, every time I pursued a new interest just because I wanted to, I knew I'd made the right choice. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe someday, my family and I will find a way to have a healthy relationship. Maybe not. But I do know this, I'll face whatever comes on my own terms, standing tall and unapologetic in the life I've chosen for myself.